Here we go, econ students. You know who it is. Get ready for that round of applause and the excitement because of the last macro live review before the big AP test. Here he comes, Mr. Jacob Clifford. Hey, econ students, this is it. Let's rock. It is time for the last live macro review. Let me first know if the audio is working. Let me know if it's working. First of all, thank you so much for tuning in. We got a lot to review. Get you guys ready. You got, 4 days for the big AP macro exam. You're going to get ready. We're going to go for 2 hours here, cover some of the key graph, key concepts. We'll give you a breakdown of the actual AP test. If you haven't already done so, make sure to tell me, tell me the audio is working first. Then go get your, right here, go get the worksheet. It's in the description below. This worksheet is different than anything you've seen before. I just made it about a couple hours ago. It's going to practice a bunch of different things, and it's brand new, and it's designed specifically for the AP test. So here we go. First things first, do me a favor. Let me know where you are. I want to know what city or what school or what teacher. A lot of you guys are different teachers. Let me know where you're from. And I'll hopefully maybe give a shout out to you and to your teacher. Also, teachers, by the way, if you're listening to this thing, teachers, keep in mind the whole AP test is changing. Like the whole thing is complete. See this injury, this is from typing too much. I've been doing so much video editing and typing and doing resource stuff that I've actually like carpal tunnel syndrome, like issues with my hands because I've been working so much and getting new resources. So after this AP test is over, I made a bunch of videos explaining all the changes that are coming May 20th. Okay, so some people are coming in, they're asking about the micro review, which was yesterday. I've got 2 review sessions for the micro review, and there's 2 macro. This is the second macro. If you didn't already see it, the ultimate review packet, the new one, has this right here. It's the same stuff as the old ultimate review packet if you got it through your school. It's the same stuff. It's just organized different. People are coming in with different schools here. Santa Maria, California. Man, we're so many people. This is awesome. We've got Greensboro, North Carolina, Chicago, Turkey, UK, London. Welcome, Londoner. That was the worst British accent ever. That's worse than my John Maynard Keynes. I'll get to you guys in a second. Let's just jump into the econ here. First of all, if you didn't already see my review session from before, I've got multiple different camera angles that I can do. The best and most important one is graph mode. If you haven't seen graph mode, it's awesome. It looks like this. Graph mode. There it is. The graph mode, again, this is the worksheet that you want, the live stream review session. Number 2, it's going to have you go over several key concepts in key graphs, 2 pages long, not very long, and we're going to be doing that in a second. Now, before we do that, really quickly, let's talk about this actual AP test in the first place and do a breakdown of the actual test. So I got to go to a different mode over here real quick. Let's go to PowerPoint mode, and let's open up a PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to talk about the actual AP test. I'm only going to talk seriously for like maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes about this test. But the reason why you want to see this is going to help you break down what you still need to study. Let's be honest, you don't have that much time. You can't read your book over again. You're not going to do that. You've got the ultimate review packet. Watch those summary videos. That should definitely help you out. But let's do a breakdown really quick. First of all, keep in mind, if you're looking to get a 5, you don't have to get 98%. You don't even need to get 90%. Here's the actual breakdown for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. According to, I think, the 2017 test, it's usually about the same. There's your percentage breakdown. So you get an 82%, you get yourself a 5. Congratulations. You get yourself a 57, 58%. You already got a 3. You pass this, you get college credit. So keep that in mind as you're studying this stuff. There is a little bit of law of diminishing marginal returns here. You know, you don't. If you are going to get a 5 anyways, and you spend actually 3 hours studying and you fail another AP test because you're trying to get, go from a 95 to a 98 on the AP macro exam, that doesn't make any sense. Make sure you pass all your AP tests because, again, this is the breakdown. Now, that said, let's do a unit by unit breakdown of each one of these things. I teach this class in 5 units. If your teacher has the Paul Krugman textbook, maybe they do it in 8 sections. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same stuff. Let's talk about unit 1 though. Here's the actual breakdown of my 5 units and the percentage on the multiple choice test. So on the multiple choice test, I sat down, broke it up for the last, 8, 10 years, and said, okay, how often do I ask questions from each of the different units? And so this tells you where to spend your time. If you know, okay, I only got an hour and a half to study before the AP test, well, you have to go watch the unit 3 and unit 4 summary. That's where the most of the questions are going to come from. So that's that. Unit 3 is a monster. So there's the breakdown. The AP test has a graph almost from every single one of the units, or at least a key concept from each one of the units. So unit 1, you're going to see production possibilities curve. Unit 2, you get the key concept of just obviously GDP and what GDP is and unemployment and all the concepts you'll see later on. Unit 3's got the Phillips curve and aggregate demand and supply. Unit 4 has the money market and loanable funds market. And Unit 5 has a foreign exchange market. Now, for those of you who are freaking out, like I've never heard any of those, and if I'm going too fast, I'm sorry. This is not really designed for students who've never been in this class before. This review is for people who are there, like you're like, I think I can get a 3, or I think I can get a 5. I just need to like tune things up. So this review is not designed to like teach you all the stuff. It's here to practice. And the ultimate review packet is for practice as well. So you learn it and then practice it. So let's break this down by actual unit. What I have is the 5. I broke down the actual test based on the different years. You can see the exam years, 2018, 17, 16, and then what concepts they ask. The reason you're looking at this, again, don't spend a lot of time and don't pause the video because I'm going to ask you questions later on, but you can see where they ask questions, right? So it's not just like each concept is equally important. You might see a scarcity question. Unlimited wants, limited resources. That might be 1 point. Last year was a really easy question. You see a production possibilities curve. There's a huge chance of it being in this unit. Now remember, that's not, production possibilities curve is 25% of this one unit, which is worth like what, 10% or 9% total. So you're going to see a production possibilities curve question, most likely. Usually it's going to be, opportunity cost moving along the curve or the shifting out the curve or a point inside the curve. It's an easy question. You're going to see a question about comparative advantage. Let's just get it down. You're going to see a comparative advantage, maybe terms of trade if it's a little harder. You can see almost every year they have 1 or 2 questions about comparative advantage. And you also might get a question about supply and demand. Now, something they've been doing more and more for the last few years is double shifts. Remember the double shift rule when it comes to supply and demand. If 2 curves shift, demand goes up and supply goes up, either price or quantity is going to be indeterminate. Remember, the trick for that is draw the 2 graphs separately and then combine the results, right? So double shifts are something you'll definitely see. It's usually with just a market, I'm saying, not aggregate demand and supply, but just like the market for cars, demand goes up and the supply goes down, and they set it up that way. But basically that's unit 1. I'm kind of rushing through it because let's be honest, it's not that huge of the actual AP test. Let's talk about some other stuff here in unit 2. Take a look at this. In unit 2, here's the breakdown. About 17-18% of the actual AP test. Most of the questions, 3 or 4 of them are going to come from GDP. What is GDP? What's the equation? It's the most important equation. You can say it with me. Oh, all the angels. CIGXN. CIG and XN. You got to know those different concepts, what C is, what I is, G and XN. They usually ask a question about, does this count towards GDP and stuff like that. There's a couple softball questions. The unemployment questions, you'll see 3 or 4 of those. Unemployment questions are usually, here's 5 different people, which one of them is frictionally unemployed or something like that. Or you might have one you have to actually calculate the unemployment rate. We practiced that skill in the previous review session. So I actually did that, the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate and the different types of unemployment and the natural rate of unemployment in the previous review session. So I'm not going to cover it today. Also, you'll see some inflation questions, maybe consumer price index, but you can see consumer price index is not a huge portion of it. Real quick, I need to mention, just for the AP Econ teachers, just the teachers out there, this is totally going to change next year. I can't tell you how it's going to change yet until May 20th, but this whole unit, it's going to change. In fact, a bunch of the units are going to change next year. So just keep that in the back of your head. The course is changing, but for this year, this is the last time. This is what this unit's actually going to look like. Okay, that's unit 2. Important stuff, like it's big stuff that you need to know, but that's it. Okay, here we go. For unit 3, it's right here. You can see this is the monster, the one I said earlier, 37% of the actual AP test. Most of it's going to be in aggregate demand and supply. If you add up all the different aggregate demand and supply questions, you're going to basically get right there, right? So the 37% are coming from aggregate demand and supply. They might give you the graph and say, okay, what could cause the curve to shift? Or just a good old question of, if aggregate demand shifts to the right, what happens to price level and output? Easy stuff. You're going to see the Phillips curve, several multiple choice questions. It might be on a free response. We're going to cover it in detail today. You might see some fiscal policy questions. Last test, there were 5 of them. Fiscal policy, government spending, and taxation, super easy stuff. You just got to remember it. Some multiplier question, perhaps. Deficit and debt, like what is the difference between a deficit and a debt? And then the whole idea of the long run, the curve, triple shift, where there's more growth in the long run. Those are all the concepts from Unit 3. Again, you can go back and look at this in more detail if you want to. But the idea here is don't spend all your time, worrying about disposable income. That's obviously not a huge concept in the test. But you got to know most of these concepts. And the reason why I'm showing it to you is if you come across something you've never seen before, honestly, if for some reason your teacher just never ever talked once about the idea of demand pull and cost push inflation, you've never even heard of that, or stagflation, then okay, note to self, make sure I learn what the heck is stagflation, right? Here's Unit 4. Unit 4, money, banking, and monetary policy. You can see that most of these questions come in monetary policy. You're going to see monetary policy and open market operations as part of that. So huge portion of the test is understanding the money market graph and how the central bank can manipulate interest rates. So that's what that's mostly coming from. Creation of money, that's the idea of using the money multiplier. And then they start asking a lot more questions about bond prices, which we'll talk about again today. And then notice there's very few questions about loanable funds. What? Yeah, loanable funds is a key graph. They almost have it on the test almost every year. It's one of the most asked free response questions. It's not often asked that much. And if it is, it's usually asked with crowding out. Crowding out loanable funds are usually taught in tandem. And you can show crowding out with the loanable funds graph. So that's the idea. Okay, Unit 5. Again, I know I'm rushing. Don't freak out. I know I'm rushing. I'm rushing because I'm showing you like the big stuff, and then we'll get into all the little stuff. Macro Unit 5, it's the shortest, fastest, quickest unit. Most of the questions come from two different things. Balance of payments, which I talked about in the last video, the current account and the financial account. And then the other questions usually come from, the foreign exchange market, appreciation and depreciation of currency. And it's all about some key relationships. If you understand the key relationships, then you're going to be fine. That said, those are the relationships. I'll come back to that. Here's the key graphs we'll be drawing today, the 6 key graphs of macroeconomics. More importantly than that, it is time for me to give you my prediction. My what prediction? I'm going to get past this stuff. So I'll come back here if I need to. My prediction, Clifford's 2019 macro FRQ prediction. Here's what I think is on the test. Now, before I tell you, I don't know. I have no clue. Don't get mad at me. Don't tweet in how you're a jerk. Why you were wrong. I don't know what's on the test. I'm just looking at previous tests based on things I've seen and how often maybe we haven't seen something for a while. These are my predictions on the 3 free responses. Now, if you didn't already know this, there's 60 multiple choice questions on the test. That's worth 2/3 of your grade. And then there's 3 free responses, 1 long and 2 short. Now, the long free response is almost always the same, not necessarily content, but structure. They'll ask you about aggregate demand and supply, and then they'll say, okay, here's a change on that graph, and then draw this other graph and just show me what happens, or maybe a calculation in there as well. But it's the structure is the same, and again, I'll show it to you today and talk about that structure. Here's what I think it is, okay? You ready? Now, before I tell you real quick, if you're in the room with your teacher, or if you're a teacher, tweet out to me your predictions. There's a game I play with other teachers. We all throw out our predictions and see what people think, and we'll see who's actually the closest. I got 2 out of 3 last year, so I'm quite proud of myself. So here we go. Let's see what I think it is. It is, bam, right here. I think this year you're going to see in free response number 1, aggregate demand supply showing a recessionary gap, then some sort of long run adjustment, which we'll show and talk about today. And then saying, instead of the long run adjustment, how about some fiscal policy and loanable funds? So loanable funds would be the secondary question, that using that fiscal policy to have, deficit spending, and then what would that look like with loanable funds? They might ask you specifically, what would happen to the supply of loanable funds? That's what I'm thinking, and the idea of crowding out. Number 2, I know some of you be all upset about this. I think it's going to be a bank balance sheet. We haven't had one in 2 years. Bank balance sheet, you have assets and liabilities, and you have demand deposits and excess reserves and required reserves. And they basically say, okay, someone deposits money in the bank, or the Fed buys a certain number of bonds, and that changes the money supply. So some sort of money supply, money market question doing that. And the last one I think is going to come from Unit 5, balance of payments, foreign exchange, and connecting foreign exchange with interest rates. And the idea that higher interest rates cause foreign investment to come in. Like people want to bring in more money, foreign net capital inflow comes into the country. So that's my guess. It's pretty much the same thing as I predicted last year. There's a few small adjustments, but that's what I think. So I don't know, though. Don't get mad at me if it's not it. I can tell you what it's not, though. I'll tell you right now. You want to know it's not? It's not going to be a market supply and demand curve for the whole darn thing. Here's a price ceiling. Here's a price floor. If demand goes up, what happens? The AP test pulls from the same concepts every single time. In case you're looking at this one, I'm saying that it's going to be aggregate demand supply, loanable funds, money market, and foreign exchange, which is 4 of the 6 key graphs. The only ones that I'm not suggesting are going to be on there this year, and I don't know, would be the Phillips curve or the production possibilities curve. Now, it's going to be 1 or 3, it's going to be 3 of those no matter what. The key graphs I was talking about earlier, they're going to ask you about those key graphs because they always ask those key graphs. So make sure you can graph them, make sure you understand them, and make sure you're paying attention in today's review session. Dang right, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, right now, let me get back to this mode. You've got to download the worksheet that we're going to be working on right now. Don't go ahead of me. Stay with me the entire time. Obviously, I put the answers as well, too. So if you're like, oh, cool, I just have the answers, I'm good. I'm going to talk about things inside here. So go with me down the line. Sometimes I'll give you time to work, and sometimes I'll just talk, give you guys some chance to maybe do some shout-outs, too, to your schools and all that good stuff. But here we go. First things first, let me get onto graph mode. You've got this thing downloaded and you're up and running. Here's what I found out teaching this for years. I've taught this class so darn graph mode. I've been teaching this class for so long, and it was about 5 or 6 years ago. I just realized, it just hit me. I was like, dude, this class is all about relationships. Oh, relationships. It's all about cause and effect. So like literally half the multiple choice questions are cause and effect. If this occurs, what happens? Or if this happened, what must have caused it to happen? The vast majority of the relationships are right here in front of you. You might have seen this before. I put it inside my PowerPoints if your teacher has my PowerPoints. But this right here, macro big picture practice, it says interest rates go up, taxes go up, government spending goes up. For each one of these, it's either up or down arrow. Right now, start filling that puppy out and try to figure out what's the relationship between these two things. This is this is the single most important thing you can do going into this test is knowing these key relationships. Because if you have this, then that and the graphs, man, you can probably get just a 3 just by knowing that. So work by yourself, fill that thing out, and I'll take a look at people who've talked before. Matt Hurdle's class, I think Mr. Hurdle's the teacher. I'll see if I can get some more shout outs to any of the schools here. I'm scrolling up. You're working, I'm talking. Somebody said loanable funds sucks. I will come back and talk about loanable funds. Someone's asking why you can't fast forward. It's because this is live. Okay. Well, okay. So people are kind of saying just random things to each other, which is cool. Do your thing. Do your thing. I'm going to start back up. Okay. Some people are like typing their answers. You probably don't want to do that. Mr. Gollin from Canyon High School. I'm not sure if I've met Mr. Gollin yet. But hey, shout out to Mr. Gollin. Shout out to Keith Roy's class. Here we go. Copel High School. I don't want to start this too much. You guys will type me all day. Mrs. Atkins. I think there's some students there from before review session. Okay. So many of you guys are here. That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here. All right. So let me go over this. I'm going to slow down over a few of these things. Let's make sure we're on the same page, though. The first one right here is by far the most important one. The relationship between interest rate and investment, you'll see in fiscal policy and monetary policy, and it's over and over and over and over and over again in the test. So interest rates go up, there's less investment. Remember, if you're brand new to this class, which you shouldn't be if you're watching this video, a lot of students will confuse what investment is and think, oh, investment is like, buying stocks, like how my parents invest. No, dude, no. Investment is always taking out a loan to buy tools and factories. It's always taking out a loan. So a higher interest rate would be increasing the price of a loan, and so you're going to borrow less money, right? Increase in taxes would decrease your disposable income. Increase in government spending would increase the national income. National income is a funny way of saying GDP. If you haven't seen that idea before, but the AP test uses different terms for the same thing. So what will happen to output? GDP. What will happen to the GDP? GDP. What will happen to the real GDP? GDP. What will happen to the national income? GDP. It's all the same stuff. So don't freak out if you see a term like that. Increase in the marginal propensity to consume. If people spend more, they consume more, that'll increase the spending multiplier. If there's an increase in capital stock, that would increase growth. That'd be more growth, means capital stock is machines, tools, and factories. Increase in inflation would decrease real wages. So if I made $100, a day, more inflation I'd still get $100 per day, but adjusted for inflation, my purchasing power would be a lot less. So my real wage would be down. Increase in inflation would do what to real interest rates? That would cause real interest rates to go down just like before with wages. Deficit spending would cause interest rates to go up. Now stop. When you see number 8, deficit spending causes interest rates to go up. Cool. What does your brain tell you? Like, tell the screen right now. When you read that, you go, that sounds like crowding out. That's crowding out. Some of these concepts, you should see how they're like organized in your brain. You should think, okay, that's crowding out, right? Just like if I said supply decreased, you should go stagflation. Like your brain should automatically do that. If the money supply increases, that will decrease the nominal interest rate. That's the idea of monetary policy. An increase in the reserve requirement would decrease the money supply, right? If banks have to hold more, then they make less money. Increase in the discount rate, that would also decrease the money supply. Central bank buys bonds. If the central bank buys bond, what's that called? It's not called crowding out. When you saw central bank buys bond, and we know that's going to increase the money supply, in your brain, you should have said, open market operations, like that open market operations. And the test will ask that so much. Every year they ask so many questions about open market operations because it's what the central bank most likely does anyways. So increase in buying bonds would increase money supply. International value of the dollar. If the dollar appreciates, that'll cause the net exports to fall. Okay. If interest rates go up, slow down. Look at 14. If interest rates go up, what happens to net capital inflow? That's going to cause inflow to increase. Now, I want you to look at number 1 and number 14. Interest rate goes up. People in your own country are going to borrow less because they don't want to pay those higher rates of return, right? They don't have to pay that back at a higher rate of return because of a higher interest rate. But foreigners, when the interest rate goes up, they're going to put more money into your country because they're not borrowing, they're lending, right? They're putting money in. This net capital inflow is money from foreigners they're putting into your system to get that higher rate of return. So keep that in mind. In this case, investment, we're borrowing. In this case, those foreigners are lending. And last one, I put it in here kind of as a little bonus. You got to know this. Sometimes just knowing the relationship will give you the answer to the question. Is interest rates go up, bond prices go down. No doubt about it. If interest rates start rising, now I want you to notice, then bond prices fall. Current bonds that have already been issued. I want you to notice how some of these things are related. Watch, like for example, if the money supply were to go up, interest rates go down, then what would happen to investment? Like you can see some of these things create a chain link. So this causes this, okay? Now, these relationships are absolutely so important. One of these days, and it doesn't help you guys because you're getting ready for the test right now, but one of these days I'm going to come up with like your top 20 relationships and just number them and then say that's a number 2, that's number 3. I can look at any fair response and be like, that's a number 4 relationship, that's number 2, it's then 5, that is 7, then 10. And you can actually see those relationships are all inside the fair responses and the multiple choice questions. If you got this and you feel like comfortable, like, yeah, I get it, dude, you're rocking. Woo! Keep it up. All right. So let's go over here. It's blank for a reason. I want to talk about the different policies, fiscal and monetary policy, and long-run adjustments. Do me a favor. Right up here, please draw a recessionary gap. I don't want to say how we got there. Don't draw a shift. Just say, okay, for some reason we have a recessionary gap. And the AP test, the way it would be worded is they'd say, in a free response that is, there's economy of whatever bill, and currently their unemployment is higher than the natural rate of unemployment, or their output is less than the full employment output, or something along those lines. So a recessionary gap, draw that up here. Forgive me for my cruddy handwriting. And done right here, draw an inflationary gap. Now I know you guys are like, dude, I got this. And you should feel extremely comfortable drawing these graphs. Super fast, pound those things out. Shout out to Mrs. Claffin's class. You know who you are. Somebody said they actually might not fail. You're not going to fail, dude. You're not going to fail. And the reason why is, 1, you've got these resources. 2, I made all these videos to help you out. And 3, you just got to spend the time to get it done. Like, get the job done. You're going to go to college. Get the job done right now, right? So here we go. We've got price level. We've got GDP for both of them. We got downward sloping aggregate demand. Again, I know you know this. Don't worry. I'm going to show you some stuff you might not know or might not remember. Upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve. And then you've got a vertical long run aggregate supply curve over to the right. Recession, if it helps you, is to the right. And we're producing right here, always produce right here, quantity and question. Here's my first question. I'll put Y at full employment. AP test might use different things. I'm using Q for quantity output, national income. We said this earlier. Is this economy at equilibrium? Question. Yes, of course at equilibrium. It's in short run equilibrium. It's not a long run equilibrium, but if you're where aggregate demand hits aggregate supply, yes, you're in equilibrium, but in the short run. So there you go. You should be able to know that point is a point inside the production possibilities curve. if we're looking at a production possibilities curve. You should be able to draw that also on the Phillips curve. That's a recession. You feel good about that? Awesome. I'm going to come back to that. Trust me. You're going to learn something here. Let's make sure we got this puppy done. Price level, GDP, real, downward sloping aggregate demand. Looks exactly the same to start. Short run aggregate supply. And then we've got a long run aggregate supply here. Y at full employment. And for some reason, we are beyond full employment. I'll put Y1 just to make you a little more confused. And then price level right there. Again, forgive my handwriting, but there it is. There is an inflationary gap. The idea, we have a positive output gap. Here we have a negative output gap. We're producing beyond full employment. So unemployment's like 2%, super low. And over here, unemployment is super high, like let's say 5 or 6% in the United States. Okay, you know that. You know that. Obviously, you know that. You're on your AP test. You're either going to get this graph, or draw it down the middle showing a long run. It always starts like that. Then they usually ask you something like this, a long run adjustment, some sort of fiscal policy, or some sort of monetary policy. Or a third option is some sort of random thing that happens. So there's an increase in the price of resources, and so the aggregate supply would shift to the left, price level would go up, and you'd have stagflation. So that's the kind of thing they might ask you. But anyways, what I'm doing here is I want to show you something. So I'm basically testing you to see if you're paying attention. You get this concept. A long-run self-adjustment, let's say there's a recessionary gap. So I'll see if I can put both of these on the screen at the same time. So there's a recessionary gap. Yeah, that looks nice. So here we are. We got a recessionary gap. In the long run, what's going to happen? Well, if wages are flexible, what's going to happen? Well, aggregate supply is going to increase. So aggregate supply in the long run eventually would shift over to the right, and it would solve the problem itself. That's the long-run adjustment. So in a recessionary gap, the wages fall. I'm going to put wages, but also resource prices. Wages will go down, which makes sense. If we have high unemployment, like 10% unemployment, people would accept a lower wage, be like, you know what, I want a job as opposed to having no job, so I'll accept a 20% less wage. And as they do that, that would increase supply because costs have fallen for firms. They can produce more. The economy fixes itself. That's a long-run adjustment. Now, if there's an inflationary gap, which is this graph, what would happen in the long run? Again, it's aggregate supply. In this case, wages would go up. Now, remember, wages have a tendency to be sticky in a recession, right? Wages don't really go down. As aggregate demand falls, wages have a tendency to be sticky. They're less sticky as aggregate demand goes up, and we're now have inflation. They have, wages tend to go up quicker when it comes to inflation. So in this case, wages would go up, and resource prices would go up, right? If everyone's using the lumber, that would increase the price of lumber and machines and tools. People are buying a lot of stuff because everyone's producing a lot of stuff, and that would cause wages to eventually go up. What happens to aggregate supply? Well, all I want to point out is it's aggregate supply that shifts. Aggregate supply is changing when there is a long run adjustment. Okay, there it is. That's it. I mean, it seems simple, and you probably see me explain that in other videos, but it's in your brain, you see what happens in the long run when wages change, or if wages are flexible? It's going to be aggregate supply. Don't shift aggregate demand. Don't do that. You know it's not that. Okay, for fiscal policy, well, there's two different things the central bank, not the central bank, Congress and the president can do for fiscal policy. Remember, fiscal policy is Congress and the president. Monetary policy, that's the central bank. So fiscal policy, when there's a recessionary gap, they could increase government spending or they can cut taxes. Great. What's that going to shift? That's going to shift aggregate demand. So a recessionary gap, aggregate demand is going to shift to the right and close that gap. What you'd also see right there is the idea of the spending multiplier, which we're going to practice actually down below. The reverse inflationary, when there's inflationary gap, they're using contractionary fiscal policy, which would be decreasing government spending and increasing taxes. In both cases, and what I'm trying to get at is they're going to change aggregate demand. In this case, aggregate demand would go up. In this case, aggregate demand would go down. But it's aggregate demand that they're trying to control through government spending and taxes. You should also know, and I'm going to show you later anyways, there's a spending multiplier for both government spending, the spending multiplier or consumer spending, and also a tax multiplier and a net transfers, a transfer payment multiplier that are different, okay, which I'll get to later on. Last one, monetary policy. This is controlling the money supply to affect interest rates. There are three things that the central bank can do when there's a recession, three when there's an inflationary gap, and then is that affecting aggregate demand or supply? That's what I want you to be thinking, okay? All right. So monetary policy. Oh, by the way, someone pointed out in the comments, which is cool. Yes, we're talking about short run, right? We're talking about this one's long run, but the long run effect of increased government spending, you could bring in other things, and the question might be more specific. If the government spends a lot of money on human capital, on education, more human capital means more training, and more training leads to more productivity. Yeah, you could say other things are going to happen. Right now, you got to leave that stuff out. You know what I'm saying? The AP test is actually really good. In fact, let me get close to you and tell you about this. The AP test is actually really good. Really good. In fact, let me get closer to your face too. It's really good about making sure that you don't go the wrong direction. The people who write the test, they're super smart people. I know most of them. And the way they write the test in such a way, there's only one right answer. There are multiple, in real life, oh my gosh, there's so many different things that could happen in real life. If there's fiscal policy, well, geez, there's a million other things that could happen. But the way the question's worded, they'll say, okay, there's fiscal policy, but not crowding out. And the multiplier is this. And they'll tell you specifically all the information you need. So if you come across a time where you're like, well, it could be up, but it could be down, or it could be this, or it could be that. Don't go for any of the could be's. Which one is it first, and then move on from there. Right? It's not going to be the third or fourth different thing down the line. All right, so that said, let's go look at monetary policy. The three things that the central bank can do when there's a recession: they could lower the reserve requirement, they could lower the discount rate, or they could buy bonds. Open market operations. Those things would all increase the aggregate demand. Remember, these are aggregate demand shifters. Yes, aggregate demand. These two shift aggregate demand. Policies shift aggregate demand. The long run shifts aggregate supply, causing the economy to go back to where it was before, or in full employment. Okay, so here we go. The other ones, this would be reserve requirement increase, discount rate increase. And I can talk about what the reserve requirement is and the discount rate. I'm assuming you know those things, but I could be wrong. Or the Fed or the central bank could sell bonds. Now, there was 1 year, they were trying to get you with this on 1 year, so don't fall for this, is they said if instead of the central bank buying bonds, they said if commercial banks buy bonds, if that makes sense. So you got to keep in mind when I say buy, I'm not talking about commercial banks are buying. I'm talking about the central bank is buying. They're buying back those bonds that they have previously issued, increasing the money supply, right? Now, if commercial banks, like if regular banks were buying bonds, then that would be the idea of the Fed selling them. So just watch out. They've only done it like once or twice. Just be careful if you see that. Just make sure you understand what the question's asking you. The point is, and let me zoom in on it, this is a huge concept. You know this. This is the idea. This will get you through most of that first response. Drawing the graph, right? Make sure you can draw this one, and long run. Right, and then this will usually get you through the first part of the graph. And then later on in the same review session today, we'll actually draw the other graphs that they might actually ask as well. Like we said, they could draw, loanable funds, foreign exchange, Phillips curve, and we'll do that stuff later. All right, that said, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. Woo-hoo! Let's do this. This beautiful looking graph right here is the long aggregate supply, short aggregate supply. And the reason why it's all curvy like that, I covered in the last video. I talked about the Keynesian range, the intermediate range, and the classical range. Not the end of the world if you don't fully understand that, or if you haven't seen it. Don't freak out. It's not mostly on the test. But there are some questions here. Give me a second. Getting a phone call, but I'm not going to answer it. Hey, if you're calling from Florida, sorry, I can't help you right now. We're in the middle of a review session. Sorry. Okay. So, anyways. All right. So what we're going to do right now is answer these questions. Question 16, 17, 18, and 19. Using this graph, we are currently, if you look at here, and you might have to write this down off to the side, we're currently right here where aggregate demand meets the short and aggregate supply. So we're producing some 200 billion GDP. That is the current GDP. Full employment would be 400, right? That's where 400 is, right? So I'm going to try to put this on the screen for the people who haven't printed this out. But there's your questions right there. Okay. I know this is not very helpful for people who don't have this, and I apologize. Super hard to read, but you can print out that worksheet. That can help you. Okay. All right, here we go. All right, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If an increase in consumer spending of 20 billion would increase real GDP to 300, what is the marginal propensity to consume? Okay, what we're doing right now is practicing the multiplier. in your class, your teacher probably, had you practice, okay, here's the multiplier and how much is the increase in government spending total cause. The AP test will ask you all sorts of stuff. So basically there's three variables, right? There's the initial change, there's the multiplier, and then there's the total change that occurs. The AP test will ask you any one of the three. They'll say, okay, here's the multiplier, here's the total change, what's the initial change? Or here's the initial change, and here's the multiplier, what's the total change? They can do any of those sort of things. In this case, and also keep in mind the multiplier, the way you get that is with the marginal propensity to consume. Like that's the key to it. So in this case, if increase in consumer spending of 20 got you to 300, well, from 200 to 300 is an increase of $100 billion. So we got a $100 billion increase that occurred from a $20 billion increase initial change in spending. So 20 became 100. The multiplier is 5. Okay, that's some information we need to know. The multiplier is 5. Now that's not the answer, but we know the multiplier is 5. The question is, what's the marginal propensity to consume if the multiplier is 5? Now, the answer, multiplier is 5. This one is 0.8, okay? That's going to be 0.8. Now, how did I know that? That equals the marginal propensity to consume. Now, the AP test, and I could show you the equations I'm using in the back of my head. I'm just doing it so quick because the AP test always uses the same multipliers. I mean, and the reason why it's just mathematically easy, and it's also not realistic at all in real life, but don't bother telling that to the people who write tests. The multiplier, it gets a lot more confusing in real life, but for our purposes, the AP test usually has the marginal propensity to consume is either 0.9, 0.8, 0.75, 0.5. That's pretty much all it's going to be, the marginal propensity to consume. And the reason why is those are the easiest ones to calculate and to transfer over. If it's 0.9, then the marginal propensity to save will be 0.1. By the way, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm sorry. The marginal propensity to consume is how much people consume of new income. The marginal propensity to save is how much people save, and they all add to 1. So if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9, the marginal propensity to save has got to be 0.1. Point is, the multiplier is 1 over the marginal propensity to save. So if that's the marginal propensity to save, then this is 10, this is 8, this is 4. Oh, not 8, it's 5, I'm sorry. And this is, what is this? 2. These are the multipliers that you end up getting. Now, I'm just mentioning this because the AP test use these so often. It's easy just to memorize and know, okay, 0.9 multiplier is 10, 0.8 multiplier is 5, 0.75 multiplier is 4. Also, it makes sense to understand, like content-wise, the less people are consuming, the weaker the multiplier. You see that? If people are consuming less and less of additional income, then the spending multiplier becomes weaker and weaker because that new income is not becoming somebody else's income and people are saving larger portions. Anyways, the idea here, the answer was 0.8 is the marginal propensity to consume. That's totally a question you'd see on the AP test. No doubt about it. Right? And again, it's not like it's a hard question. It's just maybe it's not a way you actually usually think about it. Let's go use some fiscal policy. Assume the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9 instead. 0.9 we just said is multiplier is 10. We just talked about that. So I'll write that off to the side. Multiplier is tied. What is the least amount of government spending or the government could spend to get the real GDP from 200 to 400? So if the multiplier is 10, how much could the government spend? Well, they could spend $20 billion. That $20 billion times 10 would increase their GDP could increase GDP $200 billion and close that recessionary gap. So the aggregate demand would shift over, potentially all the way to here. Now, by the way, when you see the wording, what is the least amount the government could spend, is because there could be other things happening. What else could happen? Say it with me. Crowding out. That's right. In this case, if the government's borrowing, that could cause some crowding out where they borrow, lead to higher interest rates, and then aggregate demand doesn't shift as far as they want it to shift because the idea that investment would actually fall because the government borrowed raising interest rates. Again, that's connected to loanable funds, which I talked about earlier, which I'll show you again in a few more minutes. But the concept, the way they worded this seems wordy and weird. It's, they'll say in the test, like there's no crowding out and assuming this, or they'll just word it this way, what's the least amount the government could spend, right? So they probably have to spend more to pull it off. Now, you understand the spending multiplier. By the way, this would increase if it wasn't government spending, if it was just consumer spending. So an increase of consumer spending of $20 billion would get multiplied times 10 and become 200. So whether it's consumer spending, net exports, or a government spending, that could cause that to occur. And investment as well. Investment could cause it to shift over, but investment in the long run has some other effects we'll talk about later on. More investment means more capital stock, which is a key relationship that we talked about earlier. Anyways, let's go talk about taxes. So take a look at this one. Assume the marginal propensity to consume was 0.2. All right. Marginal propensity to consume. Oh, no, it's not consume, it's save. Ooh, this is good. Marginal propensity to consume now is 0.8. All right, we got that. Now, again, I threw this in here to show you the AP test. It's not like it's hard. Sometimes they'll ask questions that you know, like they'll say, what happens to employment instead of unemployment? And just by reading it wrong, because you're just in a hurry, you get the wrong answer. It's not like it's hard. If I went too fast and I read this as marginal propensity to consume is 0.2, I'm going to get a wrong number. But if the marginal propensity to save is 0.2, that means the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8, which means the multiplier is 5. Okay, multiplier is 5 because we already said that earlier. Multiplier is 5. We've memorized that concept, and it's not particularly hard. It's 1 over the reserve requirement. So what is the least amount the government could do, cut taxes to get the real GDP from 200 to 400? All right. 200 to 400 is a gap of 200. That's what we want to do. We know that you can increase initial spending by some amount times 5 could potentially close that gap of 200. But don't forget, this multiplier we just calculated is the spending multiplier. Remember, 1 over the marginal propensity to consume. This one right here is the spending multiplier, not the tax multiplier. The tax multiplier is always 1 less. So subtract 1. So in this case, we're not looking at a multiplier of 5. We're looking at a multiplier of 4 because this is a tax question. This is a tax cut. So if we're trying to get $200 billion, right, trying to cause GDP to increase $200 billion, then what number times 4 will cause that to occur? Well, the answer is $50 billion. $50 billion times 4, we could potentially close this gap. Now, I want you to know, keep in mind that if it was spending, you have to spend less. So the rule and the AP test likes to ask this silly question because if you just memorize it, you're fine. The idea is the spending multiplier is stronger than the tax multiplier. In other words, if you're trying to close a recessionary gap and you're increasing government spending by the same amount as you maybe would cut taxes, you'd have to cut more taxes to get the same amount of output than just increasing government spending, because here's why, the initial spending or tax cut is part of it is saved. So when the government gives you a tax cut, people save a portion, and only the amount they actually spend becomes new spending in the economy and has that multiplier effect actually occur. Okay, that's that idea. So done. Now, by the way, I want to point out, let's just take a chill pill and relax here for a second. I mean, not relax because we got to move, but I want you to understand that, and again, I mention this always in the review sessions, because if you just watch my YouTube videos, you'd think that you fully understand how the economy works. Like, oh, this is easy. I can become a Fed chair. I get all this stuff. This is super easy. The real life, it is not like this at all. Not even close. The multiplier is way harder to calculate, and there's all this debate on what it actually is. I mean, there are some ways we can calculate it through numbers, but it gets a lot more confusing because people change, and they can change quickly. They can decide all to save or all to spend more. It gets more complicated, particularly also with the money multiplier. But I just want you to know that this is all theory. We're at theory zone, theory to help you get ready for that AP test. Okay, down here. What happens to inflation and unemployment as a result of this expansionary policy? So as the aggregate demand is shifting to the right because we're using fiscal policy. Now I want you to notice how these things are connected. Look. We just talked about the spending multiplier, which is fiscal policy, which we just talked about earlier, which is talking about this idea of increasing government spending, national income. We're using all the same stuff, right? So if you know the relationship, then you know the details on how to calculate things, and you understand what it looks like in the graph. You got it, dude. You're ready. You got this stuff. Good. Do me a favor. Right now in the comments, be like, I got this, right? Get some confidence. You got it. You're going to do great. Okay, here we go. What happens to inflation and unemployment as a result of expansionary fiscal policy? Now, I wrote this question to see what your brain is thinking. Remember I said earlier, when you see investment is going to fall because of increase, or interest rates are going to rise because there's more government spending, your brain goes crowding out. When you see this, what happens to inflation and unemployment? Inflation and unemployment. Your brain should be saying something. What's it saying? Phillips curve. Phillips curve. That's the idea of inflation, unemployment, and the trade-off between the two. So I actually see it, and you probably the same way. When I see this, or I see these shifts, I see them on both the Phillips curve and aggregate demand and supply. Anyways, because of this increase in aggregate demand that occurred, inflation is going to increase. So there's going to be more inflation, and unemployment is going to decrease. Now, like I said earlier, watch out on the AP test. They might say employment, not unemployment. They might say employment, and then you would say employment would increase. And price level would go up, and inflation would go up, and employment would increase. So just watch out for those little tiny dumb worded things. But there it is. Oh, some people, I got this. I got a bunch of people say I got this. One person says I'm nervous. That's okay. You'll be fine. Other people are talking about Phillips curve. Yep, Phillips curve. Okay. Again, we'll draw the Phillips curve later. Okay, how do you feel, guys? Huh? How do you feel? You feeling good? I'm feeling good. I'm excited. People wonder if I'm on drugs because I'm like this. I'm not. I don't do drugs. I don't even drink water. But I'm just excited. Like, I love this stuff. I love learning this stuff. I love teaching this stuff. And I'm excited for you guys because you're going to rock on that test. Keep in mind, you got 4 days. You're going to be sitting down. They're going to hand you that big fat book. Be like, here you go. And you're going to be like, boom. And you're going to sit down and be like, you know what? I'm freaking ready, dude. I am ready for this. And you're going to open it up and you're going to see questions. You're like, I got that. I got that. Oh, I know this. I know this. And then the graph's going to show up and they're going to be exactly like I just told you. Draw aggregate demand. Show a recessionary gap. Pfft, got it. Fiscal policy. Increase government spending. Got it. If there's an increase in government spending, what happens on the loanable funds market? Pfft, got it. Interest rates go up. Boom. Crowding out. Like, you got this stuff, dude. You got it. You're going to do awesome. Seriously. Super excited. People are saying that Mr. Clifford likes to do drugs. No, I don't. That was a joke. I probably shouldn't have said that. Drugs are bad. Hugs, not drugs. I like it. I like it. Okay, that was the first sheet of this thing. Let's go practice a few other things. Let's go do a few calculations. Now, before we jump into it, students have a tendency sometimes to freak out, be like, okay, I don't remember the equations. I don't remember this stuff. There's very few equations you have to remember. One of the key ones you do have to remember is what we just did a second ago. The marginal propensity to save and the idea right here of, if you really want to break it down, yeah, there's all sorts of equations you have to know. You've got to know that the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume equals 1. Like, is that an equation you need to like memorize and like sit down and be like, oh, I'm gonna forget that? No, you understand the concept. If you understand the concept, you're fine. You know, you might not know how to calculate percent change. That's an equation you might need to know, percent change, right? That one is, it's the new minus the old divided by the old times 100. That's a good equation to know. So percent change in GDP, what's the new GDP minus the old GDP divided by the old GDP times 100? That could tell you how much percent change. That's something you can know. You can do that for unemployment if you had to as well. So if they gave you how many people are unemployed and stuff like that, you could do that. But the reality is, these equations are all things that you can kind of figure out, particularly the multiple choice questions. You know what I'm saying? So you don't need to write that down. The one you do need to absolutely know that maybe isn't as intuitive is the multipliers. But the cool thing is the spending multiplier, which is right there, the tax multiplier, which is 1 less, and the money multiplier, which is 1 over the reserve requirement, which I haven't really gotten to and talked about. I did in the last video. But this is pretty much the same darn thing, right? This is how much the total of government spending or consumer spending, how much it gets multiplied as people spend a portion and save a portion. Spend a portion, save a portion. 1 over how much people save. The money multiplier is 1 over how much people save, but it's not people, it's banks. So a bank takes some in, holds some in reserves, lends the rest out. That gets to some other bank eventually. They hold some and then loan the rest out. And that's the idea of the money multiplier. So there's 2 multipliers you need to know, and then a third one, which is a tax multiplier, which is just 1 less. But it's basically the same equation. So really, if you're freaking out about equations, stop freaking out. Stop freaking out. Stop freaking out. You do not need to freak out. You've got this. Seriously, you've got this. All right, let's make sure you got it and do a few other calculations, particularly nominal and real. I made, in the ultimate review packet, I have a pretty good section of questions for GDP in there. You're going to be fine with that one, but make sure you practice them, calculating the nominal and real GDP. So here's what we're doing right now before you take a look at it. There's nominal and real GDP. Nominal is not adjusted for inflation. Real is adjusted for inflation. There's some people asking questions in the comments. I will get to them. Hold up on them. I'll get to them in a second. Let's do this first. Let's go bust out a few calculations. I have 2 different types of questions. One's about nominal and real GDP, and the other one's about nominal and real interest rates. I'll put them up on the screen. I'll try to get as much as I can for the people who are on their phones right now and try not to move it around. But try it on your own. Please calculate these different things and find out if you understand how to calculate these, okay? Keep in mind the AP test, no calculators. It's going to be easy not easy, but it'll be no super hard numbers. You won't get like a GDP deflator of like 15.287 or something stupid like that. And if you come in with weird numbers, then you made some sort of mistake. Let's just tell you right now. You know what I'm saying? People are asking about balance sheets. We're not there yet. We could get there if you want to, but we're not there. We got a few more graphs to draw and some calculations to do. Again, if you just tuned in, we are practicing some key calculations. This worksheet is in the description. It's free. It's part of the Ultimate Review Packet. If you have my old Ultimate Review Packet, it's not even old. It's the same thing. If you have the PDF version, it's the same thing. If you got that from your teacher and they paid for it, it's the same stuff, same things. I just created some new changes in the way it's presented, and it'll be the same thing last year. So here we go. Somebody say, I can't find it. Like I can't find the worksheet. It's in the link below. You've got to make a Thinkific account if you don't already have one. And then towards the bottom of the page, the bottom underneath exam review, it's in there along with the other practice tests. But it's on free mode, so you don't have to buy it or anything. Just it's right there. If you go to the free, it'll pop right up. Okay? Okay. Oh, that's a good question. It's a good question. Somebody asked, what unit is this? What a great question. I should have mentioned that. First of all, back up. What we just did was in Unit 3, the idea of money multiplier and aggregate demand and supply. This is pulling from Unit 2, which is right here, this nominal and real GDP. And when I teach this in Unit 4, that'll change next year, but Unit 4, when I talk about money and banking, nominal interest rates is right there, right? Again, just try it on your own, see how you did. Shout out to Mr. Kevin Gustafson. Well, shout out to Mr. Kevin Gustafson. I love you, Cliff. Hey, I love you. Sometimes people will talk about foreign exchange. Yes, I will accept all of your ideas, stuff, probably for the last half hour of the show today, but we're not there yet. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. You guys ready to rock? Let's do it. Assume the real GDP, I'll do this so you can see. Assume the real GDP is 240 billion and the real GDP deflator is 150. Now the deflator is an index number. It's just like CPI except different. I mean, real life, it's a lot different. The CPI looks at the market basket of goods and services that consumers normally buy. The GDP deflator includes everything. It includes things that businesses would buy or that foreigners would buy. I mean, it includes everything, the price of all stuff. So basically, the number 150 tells you prices have increased 50% since the base year. I made a video that talked about CPI. Take a look at that. It's the one that with the base, right? It's all about the base. If you haven't seen that video, but I give you a lot of practice. In this video, I'm purposely not doing a bunch of CPI practice, even though it's one of the things students always ask about. And the reason why is I made the other video. 1, 2, it's not asked that often on the test. This kind of question, though, might be even on a free response. Anyways, prices have increased 50%. The real GDP means already adjusted for inflation is 240. So what is that in terms of nominal? Well, it's just 240 plus another 50% of 240. So half of 240 is 120. You add that to 240, and what do you get? 360. What is billion dollars? Or B, billion dollars. So the nominal GDP, there's also an equation. If you remember this equation, the deflator equals the nominal divided by the real times 100. It's actually similar to the CPI equation, but the deflator, which is an index number, is the nominal divided by real times 100. If you throw those numbers in, it would work. Or if you just understand what you're doing, basically it's saying, okay, what value, right, is 50% higher? What number plus 50% of that number equals 300, equals the number you're looking for? That didn't make any sense, but yeah, that's the idea. When I'm doing it in my head, I'm actually not using the equation, but I can. I'm kind of doing it in my head because I understand what nominal is. Nominal means after inflation. So what's $240 billion after inflation? Well, how much inflation? Well, 50% inflation because the GDP deflator is 150. If this said 110, then this would be 264, right? So you could, if it all depends on what this number is. In this case, 50% price is higher. Now, that said, I purposely tried to get tricky in 21. Try 21. If you're just watching me and you're not doing the calculations, make sure you try 21. Let's see if you get what's going on here. What I'm trying to watch out for, and I want to make sure people are not doing, is trying to cut this in half. For example, if you said, prices increase, he already said that 150 means prices increase 50%, so it must be half of 240. Half of 240 is $120 billion. Yeah, that sounds good. No, dude, no way. You know that's not right because that doesn't make sense using this logic. Never mind the equation. 120, if that's the real GDP, then what's another 50% of 120? That's another 60. Right? That's another half for a grand total of 180. So that's 120 plus 50% of 120 doesn't equal 240. It equals a whole lot less. So that can't be right. That's not the right answer. No way, dude. Again, you can use the equation. or just think logically, and that's what I do. I think, okay, what number times half of that number equals 240? That's kind of what I'm looking for here. And the right answer for 240, 150, it's going to be 160. 160, and the reason why 160 plus half of 160, which is 80, would equal 240. Or like I said, just throw it in the equation. So on the equation, you'd say, okay, the deflator is 150. Then we've got the nominal, nominal of 240. And then x times 100. All right, you pound that thing in, you can solve for x, and you've got, oh, you can't see that. And you solve for x, and you got it. Okay, they have asked those questions. Again, if you feel uncomfortable, it's just a matter of practice. I made a video that talks about it. I would definitely take a look at that for the CPI stuff. But don't spend all day long on CPI. I gave you this question to see if you fell for the easiest, stupidest thing that I fall for sometimes too. I'm just going too fast. So if you put 120, then you know that was wrong, that's incorrect, that does not work with the logic of what nominal and real actually is in the first place. And that is probably an equation you do need to memorize and you do need to actually know. Okay, the Fisher effect, the Fisher equation is another equation you need to understand, or the concept. That's what we're talking about, nominal and real. This idea is that the nominal, or the real interest rate equals the nominal interest rate minus inflation, or expected inflation, okay? So again, it's hard to see my handwriting here, but the real interest rate is nominal interest rate minus expected inflation. And so here we go. Assume the nominal interest rate is 5% and inflation is 3%. What is the real interest rate? Well, if the nominal interest rate is 5 and inflation is 3, then it's 2%. Okay? Why does this matter? This matters when it comes to lending, particularly when it comes to loanable funds, right? When there's higher inflation, that erodes the rate of return you're expected to get back when you lend out money to somebody. So if I lend money to you for 5% and inflation goes up and it's now 3%, then now my real rate of return, my real interest rate is only 2%. Not a hard concept at all. And again, some of you guys think like, I got this, cool. Just make sure that you don't make a silly mistake as you're gunning through this. I'll bring it back when I talk about loanable funds if you want later on when I talk about loanable funds and it's why it's called real interest rate anyways. Okay. Back here at 23, assume the real interest rate is -2 and the inflation rate is 8. What was the nominal interest rate? First of all, if the real interest rate is -2 and the inflation rate is 8%, what was the nominal? This one's going to be 6%. All right. So a 6% nominal interest rate, right, minus that 8% inflation would give you a real interest rate of -2. What does that even mean? It means that you're giving someone money and the amount of the rate of return is -2. You're actually losing money, purchasing power, not necessarily money, but purchasing power on that loan. But it's better than, I guess, not loaning the money and losing a total of 8% anyways. Let's move on. 24, assume the real interest rate was 4% and the nominal interest rate is 7%. What is expected inflation? Ooh, that's a good question. The answer on this one is 3%. Right? Real interest rate is 4. Again, throw it in the equation. The real interest rate is 4. Nominal interest rate is 7. You solve for x, you get 3%. And conceptually, it makes sense. The nominal interest rate is 7. How does it become only 4? Well, you got 3% inflation eroding that nominal interest rate. Again, not a hard concept. If you're thinking but if your teacher was running out of time in Unit 4, or if you just didn't have a chance to play with it, that could be something you watch out for. But this is kind of easy calculations you're going to see. Sometimes they might ask a question as simple as just what's the equation? Like I've seen that before. You're going to see questions on the easy softball questions. If the Fed buys this amount, how much will the total money supply change? Or it starts getting it's the same stuff. They ask it in tricky ways, to verify you actually get it by asking kind of a backdoor sort of way. Okay, that said, hope you guys feel good about this. Do me a favor. Let's go back to regular mode here. Hey, I'm back in your face. How do you feel? How do you guys feel? You guys feeling good? Are you guys energetic? Are you still feeling good? I'm going to let you know. I'm going to go over these last 6 key graphs. And then I'm going to open the door up to you asking me all sorts of questions and letting me know. So we're going to do the 6 key graphs. I'll talk about any specifics you want. But if there's something you need me to talk about, now's a good time to mention as I'm going through these. Again, 6 key graphs you'll be asked to draw. They'll usually do 3 of them inside the 2 of them or 3 of them, and it depends on which one. It's like a game on the first for response. And then beyond that, they'll ask 1 or 2 of them on a second or third for response. Some people, I'm waiting for you guys to tell me in comments, what do you specifically want me to talk about when I get into the actual grades? To actual graphs. Feeling good. They say maybe. Feeling good. Good. I'm glad you guys are doing great. Seriously, it's awesome. Some people talk about the current account, which I'll talk about later on. In fact, I'll write a note to myself. The balance of payments, I will definitely talk about. I did in the last review session as well. Somebody said, are you already enrolled in the course? Yes. If you click on the worksheet, it says already enrolled in the course. Then you got to click and go to my desktop or my account or something like that. And it tells you how to, if you've already enrolled, you can't click on it again. You just got to go to like my dashboard. I think that's how you actually do it. Balance sheets. I am not going to do bank balance sheets. It's not because I don't think it's on there. I think it's going to be, remember my predictions, I think it's going to be on the test. But I made a video covering bank balance sheets that it requires a lot more practice, and I think we might have time for. If we do, we might be able to do it. Balance sheets. So many guys are asking balance sheets. Maybe I will go back and do it. Okay. Foreign exchange, Forex, please. Okay, cool. Some people talk about trade. Somebody asked about fiat money. You just need to know what it is. The bond market, when it comes to bonds, you just got to know the relationship between interest rates and bond prices. That's about it. Thank you for your input. I'll go back there and take a look at it if we need to. Let's go jump into the 6 graphs of macroeconomics. Ladies and gentlemen, you guys ready to rock? Let's go ahead and draw these things. Do me a favor, even if you don't have the worksheet, at least take out a blank piece of paper and draw these graphs out. Even if you know them and you feel totally comfortable with them, let's draw them out together and practice a few things. I did this all over the place on the last review session, but let's do it again here. First, production possibilities curve. Usually have capital and consumer goods. I'll put consumer goods down here and capital goods. Every year I tell the students there's no way that there's going to be production possibilities curve on that test. And every darn year they keep putting it on there. Not because, the reason why it frustrates me is because it's kind of an easy graph, let's be honest, the production possibilities curve, but they keep putting it on there, and I guess either students keep not getting the answers right, or the AP test just likes asking the same thing over and over again. But I used to do 5 key graphs, not including the PPC, and now I brought it back because they keep asking it. The way they usually ask it is, what's going on in the economy. It's usually just 1 point anyways. So they go, okay, where's the economy if there's a recessionary gap? Or where is the economy at full employment? Or perhaps a shift, that's possible. You just need to know there's different points on the curve. This point right here, point A, is the idea of recession or recessionary gap. B is full employment. We have frictional and structural unemployment. And C is impossible given our current resources. Unless we have some trade. We can consume it with trade. That's actually an important one. They put this on the test a couple years ago. You can get up to C if you have more technology or more resources. The curve can shift outward. You can also get there with trade, but you can't produce at C. You can trade to C. So I can trade with another country and get more stuff and then end up getting a point out here where I can consume beyond my production possibilities curve, but I can't actually produce out there unless I have more technology. And so trade kind of shifts the curve. It shifts how much you can consume. Real quickly, what kind of unemployment is right here? I'll ask the question again. Make sure to answer me out loud, like to your screen, like I'm in the room with you. What kind of unemployment at point A? We have cyclical unemployment. If that's what you put, no, it's not just cyclical unemployment. You have all 3 of them. Don't fall for that. There's frictional, structural, and cyclical. So there's going to be all 3 unemployments. Right here, the economy is in a recessionary gap. You have frictional, structural, and cyclical unemployment. Here, you have frictional and structural. You'll always have frictional and structural no matter what. So an easy question, done. Okay, aggregate demand supply. Let's just do long run for now because we can. Price level, GDP real. Give me a long run equilibrium, aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply with a line down the middle. We have now officially drawn guaranteed your free response that you're going to have, right? It's between this and the other ones we just drew, right? These guys here, right? There's going to be a recession, inflation, or full employment. You're going to have this on the test. So here it is, price level and Y1. There's where the economy is. And then they ask you some sort of shift that occurs here. You practice the crap out of it. Keep in mind, if I show you this, aggregate supply decreased. What's that called? Say it with me. Stagflation. Stagflation, higher price level, and GDP goes down. What kind of unemployment do we have? All of them. We have frictional, structural, and cyclical unemployment. The economy's in the trasher, and that's it. That's the concept of a stagflation. Sometimes I'll use the term on the AP test, a supply, what do they call it? My brain's just not working. They call it I can't believe tell me what they call it on the content or in the comments. A negative supply shock. I don't know why that escaped me, but a negative supply shock, you see that on the test a few times. A negative supply shock. You can also have a positive supply shock, or a positive supply shock could be an increase in supply. One thing I want to show you really quickly, since I'm showing this, the difference between demand pull and cost push inflation, just so you know, demand pull inflation, demand goes up, right? This is the idea that people are buying more of your stuff and that leads to higher inflation. Or you have cost push inflation. That's the idea of stagflation, running out of a key resource or the price of labor increases or something happens, and that leads to inflation through supply. So two different ways that cause supply to go up. Well, they're called different things. Done. You got it. Easy. You should also know the idea of, since I'm talking about inflation, you should also know the equation, the concept of the velocity of money. Make sure you understand what that is and the equation that it works with. So make sure you understand the different idea of what causes inflation. That's going to be there. That said, really quickly, let's do this. Let's show, since we're here and we can draw it, if you want to switch to another color, you can. I'll do it in purple. Show me what happens when aggregate demand goes down. Okay, hold on, don't do it yet. What happens to price level and what happens to GDP? The AP test asks this kind of question. Price level does what and GDP does what? Now, before you start, you have to ask yourself something. Before you go, oh, I'll just go. I want to know in the long run, in the long run, what happens to price level and GDP, assuming wages and resource prices are flexible? Draw on the graph what's going to happen, ready and go. This is the kind of question I said in my predictions I think they might have this year. Draw economy and full employment. Show, I'll give you a scenario. They won't say aggregate demand falls. They usually say there's a decrease in consumer spending, or there's some sort of event that occurs that you know clearly is a decrease in aggregate demand. And then they'll say what happens to price, level, and GDP in the long run. I don't want another short run. I want the long run. In the long run. So draw it on the graph, show what happens on the graph, and then go ahead and tell me what happens to price level and GDP in the long run. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, here we go. All right. Decrease in aggregate demand, boom, boom, boom. Aggregate demand falls. That leads to a recessionary gap. I'm not going to bother drawing a price and quantity, but in the long run, the economy self-adjusts. How do we know that? Boo! We already did that earlier, right here. If there's a recessionary gap, wages will eventually fall. Check. Aggregate supply is going to change, not demand. So aggregate supply is going to increase as wages and resource prices fall because we're assuming over time the wages are sticky, but eventually they'll adjust given enough time, and that leads to a new price level, which I will label right here because I can, PL1. Price level, what does it do? Well, it definitely goes down. What happens to GDP? Stays exactly the same, right? In the long run, GDP did not change, went back to long run full employment right there. You could see a question just like that concept. Ooh, you can't see. There it is. You might see a question just like that idea of showing long-run adjustments. Or it could do it the other way with a long-run adjustment with aggregate demand going up instead. But in both cases, long-run supply did not actually shift. That would be a change of investment with capital stock, a different concept. Okay, now you're done with that. Whoop! Let's go over here. Phillips curve. Right now, what do you label it? Now, one of the mistakes students make, and I'm not sure why, I mean, I get it, but because they're going so fast, they might label this incorrectly. Don't be that person. It's not interest rates. That's inflation, right? And maybe it's the I that throws people off, but it's inflation right here. And this is unemployment. Okay, go ahead and show me the short run and long run, the Phillips curves, right? Short run, negative relationship, short run, Phillips curve. And the long run Phillips curve. Long run Phillips curve is here. And we're starting off right there at some level of full employment, which is right there. Now, usually you don't really label this right here, but you understand what it is. It's the natural rate of unemployment. I can put that right there. Natural rate of unemployment. That's frictional and structural only. Anywhere over here would have cyclical. Any over here would have frictional and structural again, but it'd be less, right? Now, where we are in the actual economy today, well, that becomes complicated and tricky to know exactly, but we are definitely somewhere over here. We're definitely not in a recession. Unemployment in the United States is really low. So yeah, next, if we're here and this is here, let's go ahead and color it because we can. Boom, shabam, boom, shabong. All right, if this is point A and this is point A, show me on this graph what happened over here. What? Show me what happened here. So aggregate demand fell, we fell at point B, and then we ended up here at point C. You know what happens here because we talked about it in words right there. We talked about it in words. Right? And then we showed it with a graph, and now we're showing it with another graph. Show me what happens, ready and go. Oh, this is exciting. Can you do it? Can you do it? I'm not sure. By the way, does anybody else think it's weird that I'm literally in a room by myself talking? I mean, I'm literally like, obviously you guys are watching, but I'm just talking. I'm serious. I'm talking to myself by myself. in a room, and just it's weird. It's pretty weird. And I'm trying to maintain the energy level too. I'm assuming like I'm in a big hall talking to all you guys, and I can see your faces, which I can't. I don't know if you guys are sleeping. Wake up. Please don't sleep. Okay. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That decrease in aggregate demand would put us at point B. Where is point B on that bad boy? B, bad boy, right there. B is right there because a recessionary gap, right, on this graph, I'll show them both. The recessionary gap is right here. That means there's high unemployment. Price level fell, so we got to be at point B. Now, when the aggregate supply shifted to the right, that causes the short-run Phillips curve to also shift this way to the left. Short-run Phillips curve, number 2, with that new point, point C. I went into this in huge detail in my last review session. If you went to that review session, it's funny because I had this really ugly graph that I drew that was so like, it was pretty rough because whatever. But this one, same. Last time I did it the other direction, I said, how does the economy self-adjust in the long run with inflationary gap? This one, I want to make sure I show you the opposite direction with a recessionary gap. So the rule is whenever the aggregate supply curve, the short-run aggregate supply curve increases or decreases, that's going to cause the short-run Phillips curve to also shift. This one shifts to the right. This one's going to shift to the left. And numerically and conceptually, it makes a lot of sense. It's not like something you have to memorize because it's like dumb. You have to notice when from B to C, we had more output, so less unemployment, and prices fell even further. The graphs are mirror images of each other, and they show the same concepts. Make sense? Bam, there it is. Okay, awesome. Abby mentioned that she remembered that first graph. It was bad, right, Abby? Tell me about it. Okay, we're not done. No. Don't go anywhere. Over here, let's take a look at the money market graph. This is a key graph. Like I said, they're all key graphs, but you're going to be asked these all the time. This one's really easy because it doesn't really change much. This one's super easy. That's the easiest, most ridiculous graph I've ever seen in my life. This is not easy because there's so many different variations. Recessionary gap, full employment, inflationary gap, long-run adjustment with a recession, long-run adjustment with inflation, regular shifts, stagflation, an increase in supply, demand pull inflation, cost push inflation. So it has a lot of variations of the same concept, and that's why you did it so much. This one has a lot of the same variations, but if you know this, then you know that. This one has very, 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 very few things that are going to go on here, particularly on the test itself. But you know what they are. They might ask you about a demand change. They've done that in the past, but usually they make it pretty darn clear it's a supply shift. Go ahead and draw that right now. First thing up here, it's inflation, right? Inflation goes here. No, not inflation. No, this is interest rates. All right. Interest rate is here. It's the nominal interest rate, if that helps you. Nominal interest rate, so not adjusting for inflation. You'll find out later it's different for loanable funds. Down here is the quantity of money out there. When we talk about money, remember, we're not, you can't see. When we're talking about money, we're not talking about just cash that's out there. We're actually talking about the money supply, and the money supply includes demand deposits that are in banks as well. So this is the amount of money that you have on your pocket, in your wallet, and the amount of money you have in your checking account right now today. That's the idea of money. Now, I've gone over this before many times in different videos. Make sure we get it again. There's a downward sloping demand for money, right? Sometimes called MD for money demand. This time I say DM. The AP test might change it up. It's there for two reasons. There's asset demand and transaction demand. Transaction demand just means you need a certain amount of money just to buy things every single day. So people just need money. That's why demand exists in the first place. And the reason it's downward sloping is because at a high nominal interest rate, the quantity demanded is very low. You do not want very much money because you want to get a higher rate of return by taking that money and buying bonds, right? And get that higher. So if there's 20% interest rate, well, I'm going to go put that money and get that 20% return as opposed to having this extra, just cash on hand at my bank or cash in my wallet. At a low interest rate, might as well have a lot of my money out there because the quantity demand is going to be very high because the opportunity cost of holding money is nothing, not very high because there's low interest rate. You've got a vertical supply of money set by the central bank. Supply of money is right there. You got over. There's your nominal interest rate, and there it is. This can only do like normal supply and demand. It can only do four things, right? So if you're thinking like, confusing, supply can go up, supply can go down, demand can go up, or demand can go down. Four things done. That's easy. So normally they don't have you shifting demand, but they totally could. It would be pretty darn clear on what they want, though. They usually tell you shift demand. They'll say what will happen to the demand for money if there's an increase in price level. That's your classic one. So more inflation, what happens to demand for money? That would cause the demand to go up because people need more money for transaction demand, right? You need more money to go buy things. So the demand curve would shift to the right. The decrease in demand, they might ask a question about something like that too. If people, for whatever reason, change their behavior, it could shift the demand. But most of the time, it's supply. They're going to ask you about supply and that curve shifting to the right and shifting to the left. And the only way it's done is through three things that you already learned. Why? Because you're paying attention. You saw them right here in relationships. Bam, right here. Those are the three shifters in the money supply. You already know what happens to the money supply, right? Money supply, money supply, money supply. Those are the three shifters. I mean, there's other things in real life that actually do occur. There's, quantitative easing and things that won't be on the actual AP test. But there's a reserve requirement, discount rate, and open market operations. Of the three, which one's the most important? Open market operations, because that's what the Fed does the most. And it's quite frankly the one that the AP test asks the most. So again, I spent last video, I drew this with the investment demand and the aggregate demand curve. So you've seen this before. So I'm going to go pretty quick here. An increase in supply of money would lower the interest rate. A decrease would increase the interest rate. Let's do an increase. So let's say they decrease the reserve rate, decrease the reserve ratio, decrease the discount rate, or bought bonds, the Fed, the central bank bought bonds. That would cause supply of money to increase, shift to the right. Boo, 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 boo. Interest rates would then fall. Lower interest rates would lead to more investment. Have I seen that before? Oh, you can't see it. Lower interest rates would lead to more investment. I wish I saw that before. I don't know when. Earlier, it is the most important relationship. I said that in the very beginning. Most important relationships that you absolutely need to know. Lower interest rates would lead to more investment. In this case, higher interest rates lead to less investment. But you get the idea. It has a negative relationship between interest rate and investment. Okay? So that's the key of monetary policy. Monetary policy is what can you do to investment? And investment leads to all sorts of other things, particularly in the long run with growth. But that's the idea of the money market graph. I don't know if it's going to be on it this year. I think it might be. You never know. But it's going to be either that, or it's going to be the Phillips curve, or it's going to be the loanable funds market, which we'll do next. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, let's take a look at loanable funds. Okay, here we go. Loanable funds. Before, we had nominal interest rate over here. Now we're looking at the real interest rate. Okay? I made a whole video that talked about the difference between the nominal and the real and the loanable funds and the money market graph. I'm not going to explain it all here, but the concept I do want you to be able to see that this has to do with long-run decision making. The Fed can increase the money supply, and that could lead to some short-term spending, and that would occur. But eventually, because of that spending, there'd be higher inflation, and that inflation would cause the demand for money to go up, and then eventually the nominal interest rate would go right back to where it was before. In the long run, eventually with all these things happening, things kind of stable off. So this doesn't really lead to long-term lending. This does. If you're going to decide to borrow or lend, that's not based on necessarily today, right now, when we're talking about a 30-year loan for something. So it has to do with real rate of return when we talk about loanable funds, and then its effect on inflation. So adjusting for inflation over time. Okay, down here is the quantity of loans. So we've got real interest rate and the quantity of loans. Go ahead and draw right now. What does the loanable funds market look like? Do it without me doing it for you, so you got it on your own. See if you can draw that. Let's keep people. Let's keep it cordial and nice in the comments. Some people are talking about some stuff that just doesn't make sense, or it's no fun for other people to listen to. Yeah, such a troll. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So be cool. I mean, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I've been cool to you, so you be cool to me and to everybody else. Let's stay focused and just get the job done here. All right, quantity of loans. First, we've got downward sloping demand and an upward sloping, supply. Demand is by borrowers. Supply is by lenders. This is actually super important to remember this concept. When we talk about demand, we're talking about investment. I think that's important to understand. We're talking about people who are willing to borrow, and I mentioned earlier, investment's always borrowing. So this is people who want to invest. Supply is by people who want to lend, also savers. The AP test has asked this several different times. This is savings, the supply of loans. So as the real interest rate goes up, more people are wanting to supply their money. They want to supply more loans because they get a higher rate of return. As the real interest rate goes up, then less people will want to actually borrow, and you end up with an equilibrium, which is right there. That is your real interest rate, and there's your quantity of loans that take place. Boom! Loanable funds market. It's such an easy graph. It's kind of like silly they ask it, but they ask so many good questions that come with it. So you might get any question that affects investors and borrowers. That would affect this. Any question that affects lenders and their willingness to lend. For example, you might see a question, I use this one a lot, is if there's some sort of political instability, right? So political instability could actually be either one of these. You could say demand and supply. In fact, a lot of the things are actually double shifters. I mean, let's look at it. If there's political instability, if you're afraid there's going to be a coup, right? So let's say Venezuela was, there's going to be a coup and things are not looking good, and they haven't been looking good for Venezuela for a long time. But let's assume it's another country and you think there's going to be a coup. Well, let's start with supply, right? What's going to happen to the supply of loanable funds? Well, people aren't going to supply more of them. People aren't going to save more. No, people are going to be decreasing their supply, right? This is going to be less people are be putting, like foreigners can put less money into the country. This would cause the supply, no doubt about it, to decrease. And then right here, when it comes to demand, people are going to be demanding a whole lot less, right? I'm not going to take out a loan to fund my business if I'm not sure there's going to be a coup. So that would decrease the demand and it would decrease the supply. So the AP test, because they know that a lot of these questions are double shifts, would ask you what will happen to just the demand or just the supply, which brings me to a concept that I really want to talk about super quick. The crowding out concept we talked about earlier, you obviously know it, but I want to make sure you understand a concept of why. People always ask why. Tell me about loanable funds and this idea of crowding out when specifically there is an increase in government spending and deficit spending. So there is a deficit spending. What happens on this graph? It's actually two different shifts depending, are you looking at the demand or do you want to look at the supply? And the AP test will give you either one. And unless they tell you, if they say what happens to the supply when there is an increase in government deficit spending. If they ask you that, then there's only one right answer you can give them. But if they ask you what happens to loanable funds, then you can either say either demand or supply. Let's make sure we understand why this is, though, really quick. Let's make sure we're on the same page. We're talking about government spending here, right? Fiscal policy. This is what my prediction on that second fair response. So government spending leads to deficit spending. So what could happen? Well, you can say it's the supply. The amount of supply right here, this is the supply of money shifting to the left, because if we're looking at public savings, which includes the private and public savings or national savings, if you're looking at the private savings, people who save, and the government, there is less supply of loanable funds going to be available. That would cause supply curve to shift to the left. That's one way of looking at it. The other way that I usually teach it is this would be an increase in demand because the government's walking in saying, I want to borrow too, right? Now, let's do that second one real quick. I'm borrowing, my business is borrowing, your business is borrowing, everyone's borrowing, and then the government shows up and say, hey, I'm borrowing too. When they walk in, that would increase the demand for loanable funds, right? That would end up right here, and that would lead to a higher interest rate. Ooh, you know what I mean right here? Higher interest rate, right? Which would cause less investment. This is the idea of what? Say it with me. Yes, crowding out. Yes, yes, yes. Every year though, when I draw this, students go, no, I don't get it. There's gonna be more loans. Like look how many more loans are taking place here. Like this is going to be good for the economy. More loans means more investment and more capital and more growth, right? That's what this is. Why are you looking at just the interest rate? Why are you not looking at the quantity of loans? Well, back up. Remember, who is borrowing in this case? This is not loans made by private companies. In fact, if you're just looking at the private companies, it would actually be right here. If this demand curve represents the demand for private investment, I mean private people, not including the government, then that quantity would actually be decreasing of the quantity of actually people, my business, your business, other people who are actually borrowing. That higher interest rate would decrease the quantity demanded and lead to right here, so less quantity of private investment would actually take place, even though more loans are taking place because the government's actually doing more borrowing, which is the same idea as just having a decrease in supply in the first place. So whether you get rid of this demand stuff and say, oh, supply decreased, right? And you're saying there's less private loans taking place, or you say demand went up, but there's still less supply. Either way, it doesn't matter. What you're trying to point out here is this is the whole idea of crowding out. That graph, either if you show a decrease in supply or an increase in demand, this is the idea of crowding out. I'll make sure to write it down. Crowding out. AP test always asks the question about crowding out. They love it. It's one of the potential problems of fiscal policy, right? Fiscal policy, its other problems But the biggest one would be obviously debt, and then the idea of taking some sort of it takes time. There's some sort of lag time that takes place when it comes to the government recognizing the problem and then enacting fiscal policy. But there it is. That's the main thing of loanable funds. A lot of times they ask questions again. If it affects investment, demand. If it's affecting savers or lenders, it's affecting supply. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. Now, I promise, because you said you wanted it, let's talk about balance of payments, but we'll do it later. Right now, let's do foreign exchange. Inside the last unit here, real quick, there are basically two parts. We talked about it earlier in the video. We talked about there's balance of payments, which shows the current account and the financial account, and that's important stuff. And then the other part is this foreign exchange market, the supply and demand for currency and dollars. It's totally just supply and demand over again. It's so ridiculously easy. Oh my gosh, it's so easy. And the questions they ask are usually softball easy questions. You just be like, okay, I got this. So first, let's draw the graph. Over here, we've got the foreign exchange, the exchange rate. This is the exchange rate. I'll write ER. You got a downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply, just supply and demand over again. And over here, dot, 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 we get exchange rate and the quantity right here. The quantity is usually not as important for our purposes. Like, that's not the main thing. It's usually the price, and the price is the exchange rate. So if we're looking at dollars, for example, if they ask you, they could ask you, dollars relative to euro. And so you'd write down the quantity of dollars, and up here you put euros, and then dollars underneath, or euros over dollars, if they wanted you to actually label it, and they gave you the other currency. Sometimes they don't give you another currency. They say the international value of the dollar. You just write exchange rate, and that's where we actually are. Now, there's only four things that could occur. You've seen this before, bro. You've seen this before, right? You've got demand that can go up, shoop. You got demand that can go down, boop. You got supply that can go up, bing, or supply can go down, boop, right? There it is. You got this. But what you need to know is there's just four shifters. If you know the four shifters, you're fine. There's only one that's kind of tricky. I'll write them down here. I did this in the last video too. First one is tastes and preferences. People prefer things from other countries and they need their money, right? The second one is income. If one country is rich, they asked this in last year's free response question. If one country is rich or poor and they're a trading partner, that could increase how much of their stuff they buy. If they increase more stuff they buy, they need more of your currency. The third one is inflation. And the last one, number 4, is interest rate. Interest rate again? Interest rate? Yeah, interest rate. So let's do this. Let's say there's an increase in the interest rate. So right now, by yourself, assume there's an increase in interest rate in the United States. What does that do to that graph? Okay, so higher interest rate, what happens to the foreign exchange? So just to clarify, the AP test won't be this way. It won't be, but it'll be very clear. It'll say, okay, draw the supply and demand for the US dollar. Done. There's your 1 point. Now assume the real interest rate has increased in the US relative to other countries. Show what happens on the graph. Now, usually I say, well, show what happens to demand or supply. I'm going to ask you, show what happens to demand and supply. Yes, is technically a double shifter. The AP test might ask you one or the other. Most of the time they do. What happens to demand or what happens to supply? In this case, both demand or supply are going to shift. You're going to show me because you are awesome. So show me right now on that graph what happens to demand, what happens to supply. Okay, go for it. Somebody asked me about tariffs. Tariffs, right? That makes sense. Tariff, I don't have as a shifter. Tariffs would also be a potential shifter. Someone said, what about tariffs? Yeah, you're totally right. Tariffs could be another thing that would cause people to buy less from another country because they're legally not allowed to, right? I do that kind of under taste in my brain. I prefer not to pay high tariffs. So I'm not going to buy Egyptian silk or whatever because there's a tariff on it. I prefer not to pay those higher tariffs, but you can make it as its own shifter. Okay, here we go. Let's do it. Higher rate of return. Well, luckily, I wish we knew this information, right? But we totally do when we learned it earlier. Oh my gosh, this is so easy. Higher interest rates lead to more net capital inflow. This right here, which I talked about earlier. If you remember, I actually talked about these side by side. We talked about the idea of interest rates affecting borrowing in your own country and affecting foreigners coming in. Now we can actually apply this. So if you've been watching this whole video for the last hour and 30 minutes, you can see I'm doing the same stuff. I'm talking about the same stuff. You got this. Here we go. Let's do it. First question, demand or supply, both are going to shift. So let's start off with demand. So if there's higher interest rates in the United States, foreigners are going to come in, they're going to demand more dollars because they want to get those dollars so they can buy more American bonds because American bonds have a higher rate of return than their own country, or at least higher than they were before. So there's a certain amount of capital flow that will come into the country. Done. Perfect. By the way, if you're wondering, that's all part of the financial account. That's another concept. That's part of balance of payments. We're not there yet. But in the financial account, the other countries are buying more of our financial assets. Now, remember, demand, this is key. The demand is basically made up by foreigners. These are the people who demand dollars, the foreigners. The Americans are the ones that supply those dollars. So the Americans are supplying dollars. What's going to happen to those dollars? Well, they're going to supply less of them, right? Why? Well, I'm not going to be supplying dollars I'm not supplying other dollars in other countries when I can keep my money in my own country and get the higher rate of return in my own country, because now there's a higher interest rate, right? So supply is going to decrease. This graph is super ugly. That's okay. All you got to really know is that the exchange rate, I'll put 2, the exchange rate is going to go up. There's going to be the dollar is going to appreciate relative to other countries. Now, here's what gets weird. Now stay with me. We're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit here. The AP test knows, as just like you know and just like I know, that you can start doing some weird cycles with this. So stay with me. Higher exchange rate, right? That higher exchange rate would mean people would buy less of your stuff because your currency now appreciated, so your exports would actually fall. Lower exports could decrease the demand for your currency. And so this curve starts, like, these things start rolling on themselves. Well, this could cause this, and that could cause this, and that could cause this, right? And they keep doing that over and over again. You got to keep in mind, just do the initial first change. The AP test will tell you, okay, this shifts, what happens now? Do you know what I'm saying? Later on, they could say something like in part B of some sort of question, according to the exchange rate you said in part A, what'll happen to exports in the country? Do you know what I'm saying? And then you could say, okay, well, if the currency appreciated, then exports is going to fall. You can do that concept, but they'll be very clear on what they tell you to do. Don't be like, okay, well, don't take it down the rabbit hole and say, okay, well, if interest rates go up, then then the value of the dollar appreciates. And if it appreciates, people are going to buy less of their stuff. So exports is going to fall. And lower exports leads to lower aggregate demand. And lower aggregate demand leads to lower price level. And lower price level would actually cause other people to buy more of your stuff. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, no. Stick with the initial change. These things can go on forever. And that actually applies to all of these. Loanable funds, money market, you can just keep going down some weird rabbit hole, because really, it's all about relationships, right? And if the relationships, are all related to each other, you can keep going over and over and over, going in circles. Now, that said, ladies and gentlemen, take a big, giant step back, and let's take a deep breath here. Ready to go? All right. You got this. Here it is. The 6 key graphs of macroeconomics. There they all are. You understand how to draw them. You're going to be asked those 4, or those 4, or those 2, or those 3. I don't know. It's just some random game on what they're going to ask you. But you're going to be asked to draw these things and shift them. And I promise you, I covered the vast majority of what they're going to ask on any of those fair responses through graphs in that section I just did right there. Right? Between that and what we did earlier with drawing a recessionary inflationary gap, and then the fiscal policy and monetary policy stuff we did, dude, you got the free responses. Most of my students do really well actually on the free responses because of that, right? So make sure you rock those free responses. Take your time to draw those graphs correctly. Real quick, what we're going to do, we've got about 28 minutes left. I'm going to ask you some more to open up the floor to ask me questions. Listen, before we start, I reserve the right to say, no, I'm not going to cover that, only because it's either something I covered in a previous video that's like really specific, that's really easy, or down the road, or it's something that it's something I did in the review session, the last review session. I talked about like the unemployment rate, labor force participation rate, some stuff in that last one. Here we go. Crowding out. We already did crowding out. That's like the one concept I did a bunch of times. So crowding out, someone asked about that one. Crowding out, you already know. It's this idea here, the government borrowing. That's crowding out. You got it. The velocity of money. Again, I don't want to, I'm going to keep my eye up at the same time as you guys are doing this stuff. The velocity of money is part of a bigger picture concept of the idea. Velocity of money equals the price times the quantity. You might see a different equation from your teacher. Oh, you can't see that. This right here. Right? Balance sheets. Balance sheets, please. Interesting. I'm curious. Target currency. I'm seeing all your stuff. Okay, so this right here, the money supply times the velocity of money equals the price times the amount of actual stuff. This is probably better as Y instead of quantity, but the amount of stuff, this is real GDP times the price gives you the nominal GDP. This is the nominal GDP, right? And this is the amount of money that we have times how much that money is spent and respent, which is the velocity money, equals the nominal GDP. That's that concept. For some reason, I don't know why it's this. The name of this is escaping me. So really quick, tell me, what is this actually called? I'll know in like 10 seconds. Maybe it's the fact I'm doing this live. This is the quantity theory of money. I cannot believe I forgot that for a second. The quantity theory of money. This is some Milton Friedman stuff here. The amount of money we have times velocity money. The AP test will ask you a question. If you increase the money supply and velocity and the output are held constant, what happens to the price? Well, the price goes up. Basically, this tries to show you that money always, in all cases, inflation always is caused by increasing the money supply. Let me go back to what you guys are asking about. Bond prices, balance sheets. Man, I should have brought some stuff out for balance sheets to have you guys practice. Excess reserves, balance sheet. I just did quantity theory of money. Thank you. Oh, you guys are answering my question. Yeah, you're good. You're good. Yep. It is an identity. Yep, I agree. Quantity theory of money. You guys are all telling me. Thank you. I appreciate it. There's like a 3-minute delay if you didn't already know. Okay, back to request mode. I don't have a free response to print out. Maybe I can pull one up on a PowerPoint. But you definitely want to practice. Let me get this back up. You definitely want to practice the quantity theory of money. Not the bank balance sheets. There's so many good free responses that are out there. If you didn't already know this, there's on my website, if you go to acdcecon.com, there's a free response breakdown. That's actually super valuable because it tells you the free responses are all available online. They're all free. You can just go on the College Board website. You'll have access to all of them. But on the College Board website, you have that. Then go to my website and it'll show you what the questions are based on the topic. And then as you look at the actual topic, you can go, oh, okay, I'm going to go study the bank balance sheets. Boom, you click on a bank balance sheet question, and then you do that one. Or I made videos, if you have the Ultimate Review Packet, I made videos where I actually went over some of those as well. Somebody's asking for aggregate demand. I'll say names. Jordan's asking for aggregate demand and the Phillips curve, which I did in the last review session. So take a look at review session number 2. How about this super fast? Because I think this is actually pretty valuable. Let's do this. So do me a favor. Let's go ahead super fast and let's go finish off foreign exchange. I did interest rates. Let's go do the other one real quick. Here is the exchange rate. Here's demand and supply. So we're drawing the supply and demand for foreign exchange. Here's the exchange rate at equilibrium. And here's the quantity. And here's the question. What happened if there is an increase in price level? No. Let's do decrease. No. Let's do increase. I'm sorry, guys. Increase in inflation. Okay? So you can't see that anyways. So there's an increase in inflation. So that's it. So show me what happens on this graph. We're looking at foreign exchange. So this is the supply and demand for dollars, and there's an increase in inflation. Show me what happens on that graph, okay? And the way this will be worded on the AP test is they say draw the supply and demand for currency for the dollar or the euro or whatever it is, and then assume that there's higher inflation in the for the euro. What happens when there's higher inflation? And they usually tell their either demand or supply or what happens. But what they're trying to get at is what happens to the price, or in this case the exchange rate. So what happens to the exchange rate, and in this case also the quantity. And then they can ask you after that what happens to the amount of what happens to net exports after this change occurs. Anyways, assume there's inflation. What happens? Ladies and gentlemen, you got to know this. Earlier, we just tried this. Remember with interest rates? We said interest rates go up, and this was what happened. This was a double shifter. We'll take a look. Remember this? I just talked about these are the 4 shifters of foreign exchange. Tastes and preferences, income, those are single shifters. These 2 are double shifters. What? They're double shifters. 2 things will shift here. I'm going to leave this ugly part out. In fact, I'll make it uglier. You can't see. I'm ugly. Okay. All right, here we go. So what's going to happen when there is an increase in inflation? So higher price level. There's your shifter. All right, let's do this. Okay, first, you got to think of, we're going to analyze the Americans or foreigners. Let's do both. In this case, let's start with Americans. The Americans, they're going to want to do what? Oh, crap. They're wanting to go buy more things from other countries, right? So Americans are going to increase the supply of the dollars, right? So remember, supply is by Americans. And they're going to supply more because they're going to go buy other countries' stuff. The other countries want to buy less of our stuff because there's higher inflation. They want to pay those high prices. And so the demand for the dollar, we're not looking at goods and services, although that's true. Demand's going to fall for American goods and services, right? Demand's going to decrease, leading to boop, 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 the exchange rate. I'll call it exchange rate 2. The value of the dollar is definitely going to decrease. Notice this is a double shift. Supply is going to increase and demand's going to decrease. But no matter what, there's going to definitely be a decrease in the exchange rate. If you drew this and it says, well, exchange rate might go up, but it might go down, you've made a mistake, right? For the double shifters. Remember, there's two things in the two different shifters in foreign exchange that are double shifters. The interest rate, which we did earlier, right there, and then also right here, inflation is also a double shifter. Now, the AP test usually asks a dual question here. They say, okay, this is all A. Based on your answer from A, in B, what happens to net exports for the United States? So what happens, or exports, or net exports, what happens in exports? Will it increase or decrease? Well, based on this, it says the exchange rate's going, or not, the exchange rate's going to fall. So dollar has depreciated, which is going to cause exports to go up and imports to go down, right? Why? Because a cheaper dollar, people are going to buy more of our stuff, and we're going to buy less of other people's stuff. And so net exports, right, is going to, since this is a negative number, net exports is going to go up, right? So remember, imports is a negative number towards GDP. The point is, net exports is definitely going to increase when the dollar depreciates, all right? So that's another relationship. Do I have it on my relationships page? I don't, but it's a key relationship, right? Relationship between the exchange rate and the net exports. I don't have it on there. Ooh, I got to add that one. So again, we're doing key relationships. Relationships. Cheaper currency, depreciation leads to more net exports. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up, this idea of net exports and depreciation of the currency, they ask that so often. It's ridiculous. They always kind of go together. Boom, boom. You make sure you understand that concept. So there it is. This is a double shift, right? The idea of inflation, and then net exports goes along with it. Done. How do you guys feel about that? You guys feel good? Cool. Awesome. Since we're in this unit, and the reason why I'm spending some time here is because this is probably the unit you probably rush through. If you don't have a year-long course, teachers go through this very fast. We got to talk about balance of payments because you asked earlier. Balance of payments has two accounts. There is the current account, and then there is the financial account. It's really a financial account, which is really, gosh, horrible handwriting. Okay. There's two different accounts with balance of payments. The current account looks at basically net exports and buying goods and services. That's what the current account looks at. So this is the balance of trade, which is inside of here. And the financial account looks at buying and selling financial assets. And so if you have a deficit over here, if you have a trade deficit with another country, then you have to have a surplus in this one. And that's actually pretty important. When we have a trade deficit with China, that means we're spending all this money on Chinese goods. They're using some of that money to buy our goods, some of our American dollars to buy those goods, but the rest of those American dollars aren't being used to buy goods and services. What are they being used for, right? If you're thinking like, well, why would anybody exchange their Chinese yuan for American dollars if for some reason they have now all these yuan that are not being used to buy goods and services? Well, they're being used to buy financial assets. They either hold them in cash, which is a financial asset, or they go buy American stuff. They go supply the loan and increase the supply for loanable funds and make more loans available for Americans by buying American bonds. So again, this is looking at financial assets, and this is looking for the goods and services. You see a couple of questions, maybe on a multiple choice, where they'll ask you a scenario that's, okay, where does it count? So current account would be something like, if France buys more skateboards from the United States, that counts towards the United States current account, right? And there would be, in that case, if France buys it from America, that would be moving the current account towards a surplus because we're selling more things to France. Americans are selling more things to France. For the financial account, this would be like someone in France buying an American bond. So that's, or they're buying American hotel. So there's a hotel in the United States, and the French company now owns it. That is a financial asset, and that definitely count towards the financial account. Again, this whole thing is called balance, payments, boom, that's it. Again, it's not particularly hard. It's just one of those things you have to see. The reason why students freak out about it is because usually they're kind of like in a hurry and their teacher hasn't talked about it because they're just going so darn fast towards the end. Other people, I think they had asked me about The circular flow model. I made a really good video, the one I did for Matrix, talking about the circular flow model. I am not going to cover that one. It's actually important, like the idea of the circular flow. Inside Unit 2, there are several different questions they're going to ask you. Let me really quickly, because I can, go back into that PowerPoint. Do me a favor, take a look at this. By the way, people who came in late, this right here is my predictions on what I think is going to be on the AP test this year. It could be wrong, could be totally wrong, but this is my predictions. Do me a favor, go tell your teacher. Go tell your teacher to text me or tweet me their predictions on what they think is going to happen. We'll see who gets the closest this year when it comes to the AP test. So make sure to do that. Also, tell your teacher, thank you so much for being awesome and helping me actually learn this stuff. That'd be awesome as well. And also, if you are a teacher, teachers, don't forget this whole course is changing, particularly macro. Oh my gosh, it's changing. The Monday after the AP test, I have a video that's going to explain all the big changes. So keep that in the back of your hand. For students, you don't care. You just pass that darn AP test and you'll be fine. Let's go take a look really quickly at the skills for the free response. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do right now. I want you right now to say out loud so you're engaged. Check, right? If you know it. If I give you this thing, you go, okay, I got that. Check. Okay, so here we go. Let's do it. 12 skills for the free responses. Okay, number 1. Oh, went too fast. Can you figure out which country has a comparative advantage? Check, right? So if I gave you 2 countries and the goods, and I say, okay, this one and this one, you can calculate the per unit opportunity cost for both output and input questions. Do you know how to calculate comparative advantage? I told you, if you haven't seen it in the unit summary video, there's something called what do I call it? The quick and dirty. Oh my gosh. The quick and dirty, I talked about a really fast way of getting that comparative advantage. So check. How about this? Terms of trade. Terms of trade is with comparative advantage, but not just knowing who should specialize in what, but how many trains should they trade for each car. There's a trick for figuring that as well. There's a video and there's a practice video where I do just that. So basically through this this little thing I'm showing you now, write a note to yourself. If you come across something that you don't know, that you can't do, I'm going to watch the video that explains that, because I made a video pretty much for every single one of these ones. Calculate GDP and GDP deflator. We did deflator a little bit earlier, but can you calculate and understand what counts and doesn't count towards GDP? Do you understand that things like financial purchases don't count if nothing was actually produced? So there has to be a good or a service provided. Financial transactions don't count. Used goods don't count towards GDP. Next thing, identify who's helped and hurt by inflation. I haven't talked about this, but we did a little bit when we talked about nominal and real, and we talked about the interest rate. Obviously, helped by unanticipated inflation is borrowers, right? They pay back a lower real interest rate in terms of purchasing power when there's unanticipated inflation. And who is hurt is the lenders. Lenders are hurt in general by unanticipated inflation. So check. Use the shifters of aggregate demand supply. Check. That one is, like I said, probably 4 multiple choice questions, and definitely something using fiscal and monetary policy at the very least inside a free response. Next one, calculate and use the spending multiplier. We did that earlier. You got it. Check. Explain how the economy adjusts in the long run. Dude, we got that earlier. Check. Read bank balance sheet. Oh, I bet you guys are all, bank balance sheets, do bank balance sheets. I made a video about that one. It's a practice video. It's not like a concept video. It's like, okay, you know it, now practice it. So you got to watch that video to do that one. I'm not going to do it today. I just don't have the time. Next one, calculate and use the money multiplier. Can you do that? Can you see that when the Fed buys a certain number of bonds back from the commercial banks, that gets multiplied times the multiplier. You should also know, by the way, there's 2 ways of looking at those questions. So I'm not going to do a bank balance sheet, but I'm going to give you the trick here. The AP test usually asks 2 ways in 2 types of questions. The first one is when someone goes to a bank and deposits money in the bank, and they say, okay, what happens to the money supply? Remember, when someone deposits money, cash in from their pocket into the bank, that's already part of the money supply. So that's not getting multiplied by that exact number. So if you deposit $100 in the bank and the reserve requirement is 10% and the multiplier is 10, that doesn't become $1,000. Would I say $10? If you deposit $100, that doesn't become $1,000. So multiplier of 10. So you put that money in, it doesn't get multiplied by the full amount because some of that money was already in the money supply. Only the amount that gets initially loaned out is brand new money created. So when the bank holds 10% and then lends out the other 90, that 90 gets multiplied. So if you don't see it numerically in your brain, just understand the concept. That's what I'm trying to get at. The concept of the money multiplier is what's important. And understand that money can come from someone's pocket, or it can come from the central bank buying securities, buying the bonds. When the Fed buys bonds, that now goes from, in the assets column for the bank, from bonds to now excess reserves, and now they can loan the whole darn thing out. And when they do loan that out, that starts the process of increasing the money supply, and it gets multiplied by the full amount. So one more time, from your pocket, from cash, does not get multiplied by the full amount of the multiplier, only amount that's initially loaned out. When it's the Fed buying those bonds and now becoming part of the bank's excess reserves, when they make that loan, yes, that gets multiplied by the full amount. It's possible. It doesn't necessarily get multiplied. I mean, the AP test has to clarify, assuming there's no leakages, assuming money doesn't get destroyed or saved or doesn't make its way back in the banks. And when they ask that, they say, okay, what's the most the money supply can create, right? So from cash and pocket, it has less total increase in money supply, in new money created, than if it's from when the bank buys bonds. Okay, next one. Explain open market operations. I pretty much just did that. Open market operations is when the Fed, central bank, buys or sell bonds, and that increases the money supply, or at least starts the process for initiating an increase in the money supply that can change interest rates. But the AP test asks open market operations all the time. Just be careful, though. When you see on the AP test, they say, okay, what fiscal policy could lead to blah? Don't put a monetary policy, right? Don't say, oh, buying bonds if they ask for fiscal policy, and don't do the reverse. If they say, what's a monetary policy? Don't go increase government spending, right? So keep fiscal and monetary policy separate in your brain. Next one, explain how exchange rates affect net exports, which is totally what we did earlier. That's a relationship. The idea that depreciation actually causes more net exports. That actually leads to more exports when your currency has less value. Last one, categorize transactions based on banks' balance payments. They haven't done this in a few years. I'd have to go look to see how often, but it's been a few years, I think, since they've asked you, okay, here's 3 scenarios. Are they the current account or they're the financial account? They have done that in the past. And hopefully, if they see that, you're going to know current accounts, goods and services, and a few other things are in there, but nothing that's super important. I'll tell you if you want to know. The current account includes goods and services, right? It also includes like money earned from the asset that you own in another country. So if you have a hotel in another country, the money you earn from that, the dividends, or the money that you earn, the interest or whatever you earn from that asset, that would count towards the current account, because it's not owning the asset, it's the money you're getting from that asset. Right? And the third one is some sort of transfer that's coming in, like if one country gives aid to another country, or if money comes in from another country because, the one worker who works overseas sends money to their family overseas back home, that would count as well. That's called remittance. That all counts in the current account. That's one side, current account. The other side doesn't have a bunch of categories, but it's the financial account, which has a bunch of different financial assets that people can buy. They can buy cash in other countries. They can hold their cash. They can go buy, a real asset, like some sort of like a hotel, like I said earlier, or they can go buy bonds or stocks that are inside another country. Again, that's the idea of the financial account. Okay, so check. Can you do each one of these skills in preparation for that first response? If you can, you got it. Between those skills I just showed you and between these graphs you just drew, you are ready, darn it. You are ready for that AP test. This is the key concepts. Between what I just showed you on that last slide and all this, all of your responses are pretty much entirely covered. The only thing that's not on there, I don't think I put CPI on there. I think that's it, honestly. I mean, seriously, it's all in there somewhere. So if you understand those things and you look at these graphs, go check, then you're ready. You're up and running. Okay, really quickly, let me go back to a couple of units. Take a look at Unit 4 over again, or Unit 3. I want you to see, now that we've had a chance to go over this, between the 2 review sessions and definitely for the ultimate review packet, I've covered all these concepts. The only one I haven't done, which we'll do right now, is a long run shift. So let's go super fast and gun that thing graphically. Right now, what I want you to do, take out a piece of paper and please draw an economy at long run equilibrium. So here we go. Let's do it. Show me an economy. So the way you see on the AP test is they'd say something like, the current economy is at full employment output or long run equilibrium. So go ahead and draw that super quick. And here it is. You got price level, GDP. By the way, using aggregate demand and supply. Obviously, you could do it with the Phillips curve, but using aggregate demand and supply, here's aggregate demand, Here is aggregate supply. Here it is. And then, of course, you have the long run aggregate supply right down the middle. Boop. Oh, gosh, that's so ugly. Off to the side. By the way, that counts on the AP test. You're fine. As long as you draw a big dot, you're fine. Price level, GDP, Y output right there. Okay, here's the question. The question is, man, that's ugly. I'm not sure why those demand curves, spike curves are so inelastic. Okay, if it's like this, I want to know what's going to happen with there is an increase in investment. Okay, I know I've covered this several times in other videos, but let's say there's an increase in investment in the long run. I want to know what's going to happen. Now, in the short run, price level would go up and quantity would go up. So you could see on the AP test, okay, what happens in the short run? Price level goes up, quantity goes up as aggregate demand shifts to the right. But I want to know what's going to happen in the long run. So draw on the graph, what's going to happen. I got my purple pen ready to go. So you draw it, prove that you understand what's happening here and the idea of economic growth. Notice, I'm not saying government spending. No, I'm not saying consumer spending. No, I'm talking about investment. Investment would mean more capital stock, more machines, tools, factories, all that good stuff. Well, we said aggregate demand would go up. Yes, that's no doubt about it, would increase because there's more spending to buy stuff, right? There's loans taken out to buy more machines, tools, and factories. That means also there's more production. Short run aggregate supply would shift to the right. And that also means the long run aggregate supply would also shift to the right. Now, hopefully you're not freaking out and you've seen this before several times. I bet you have. But that's the idea of long-term growth. That's the same idea as the long run aggregate supply curve shifting to the right is the same idea as the Phillips curve shifting outward with capital goods and consumer goods. So same concept, same concept. Now we're producing more stuff. Now, just to make sure you know this, the natural rate of unemployment stays exactly the same, right? Before we had, 4 to 6% unemployment, and we still have 4 to 6% unemployment. We just have it now producing more stuff with that same amount of frictional and structural unemployment. This can be shown with another graph, by the way. Your teacher might have taught it to you. It's called the aggregate production function. The AP test will be bringing that in next year, not this year. So teachers, note to self, there is other ways to show this concept and other things that have not, the test is changing. Leave it at that. I don't want to confuse this year's students. But there's other things happening here. That's the idea of GDP shifting to the economic growth throughout the entire economy. One more time, let me show you. This is because of investment. If it was because of government spending or consumer spending or net exports, that would not cause this to occur. That would be something completely different, which we drew earlier, right? Which we did the other direction. The economy is self-correcting. Remember self-corrections? In this case, that doesn't help you. But the economy, the aggregate, if it was government spending would go up, and then the economy would self-correct. We did talk about it when we talked about right here, right? This idea, an inflationary gap. Eventually, wages would go up. Aggregate supply would cause the economy go back where it was before. So make sure you watch out for that. If you see a question talking about investment spending, we're talking about a triple shift. And this is the idea of growth, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Growth. There it is. Okay? All right. That's the idea of economic growth. I think with that, I've covered every single major concept inside of the test. Let me go back really quickly and look at that screen that showed us from here. If there's one more concept I need to cover. Remember, in the very beginning, I showed this to you. This is the breakdown. You can actually pause the video later on if you want and come back to this. This is how often they ask certain questions on the actual test on specific concepts. You might see a question about the circular flow. The people who asked about it, keep in mind, it's only worth 1 point. GDP, like I said, is going to have what is GDP, what counts towards GDP, what doesn't count towards GDP. I covered most of these things, velocity, quantity of money. I did that. Man, I did all this stuff. You're ready, man. You are ready. Disposable income I didn't talk about, but we did a little bit with taxes, macro 4. We did this. I know I'm going quick. You can always go back and look at it if you want. Dude, you're ready, man. I got you ready and you got you ready. You're ready. Oh, you didn't see that screen. Sorry. Okay, it's okay. All right. All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We got to finish off. Don't go anywhere yet. Do me a favor. A couple things. Remember, you're learning economics, which I appreciate you're learning. This is not just graphs and this stuff. There's a lot more going on in economics, like in the world, that's maybe you don't talk about in class because you're trying to get ready for an AP test. The AP test, I want you to do well, and I want you to study this stuff in college. But keep in mind, economics is bigger than just graphs and calculations. It's a way of thinking. If you think like an economist, it'll improve your entire life. It's going to improve your relationships. It'll improve your relationships with other people. It'll make you a better voter. It'll make you a better decision maker. It'll make you a better entrepreneur. It's increased my income and my way of life because it helps me make better decisions, and that's what it's all about. I hope my videos have helped you. Again, say thank you to your teacher. If you got the Ultimate Review Packet and the school paid for it, that's awesome. And if you got it yourself, thank you so much for supporting my YouTube channel. I appreciate it. Please tell the other classes in future years that the Ultimate Review Packet helped you out. I have been thrilled to be able to make these videos and to teach you guys. All this energy I have is so much excitement because honestly, I'm so excited for you guys to go out there and rock this test. All right, so your job right now is to go get ready for your test. I'm gonna give you some more tips here towards the end. You only got 4 or 5 days left. Make sure to look at the summary videos. Also make sure, right before you go on the test, I made a unit summary video, not the unit summary, the everything you need to know video. It's on YouTube. Everything you need to know is all right there. It's about 30 minutes long, and it does like a recap of all the key graphs so you can see them one more time. So if nothing else, watch that video on your phone, then hand them to the proctor your phone so you're actually done. So try that. If you have the time, do some practice multiple choice questions. That's what we didn't do today. I wish we had time, but it's not a very good use of my time to go over, let you have time to work on multiple choice questions. But try those because I think that's the one area that we have not done. We did for responses. We talked about the concepts. Right now, your job before today and the AP test is to sit down, do some multiple choice questions, one by one, and see what you're missing and why you're missing it. That'll guarantee get you that score that you guys are looking for. Anyways, thank you so much for watching my videos. You guys rock. My predictions, let me know what your predictions are. See me on Twitter, and thank you again for subscribing and liking this video right now. You guys are awesome. Until next time.